Our story today begins with a beauty with red eyes, smiling and watching as the name Nori is spoken in someone's mind. The beautiful girl's hand brushes the chin of a boy, and they seem to be underwater. She gets closer to him, their eyes meeting, and the boy begins to doubt. Was she really just a girl? The boy starts wondering who she was, until something red begins to spread through the water. His chest was stained red, and his shirt had a large hole. She had just pierced him with a dagger. She seemed sad, and the boy began to wonder if she was the one who stabbed him, while also wondering why she looked so sad. Nori was the boy's name. He heard her calling it, and he wondered how she knew his name. The scene changes, and we see an open book. On its cover, someone was crying, and the title read, "The Crybaby Teacher Who Goes to War in Another World." A boy was reading in the back of his classroom, while the other classmates were having fun and chatting. He was isolated from everyone. The name of that boy was Takafuji Lee Nori, and he is our protagonist. He seemed to be waking from a dream, wondering if he had just dreamed about that girl, which seemed to be the case. It was the same day, the same place, the same behavior from everyone around him, while he read the same novel. A purple light began to emanate from the middle of the classroom, making him think that the day should have been just like any other, but it wasn't going to be anymore. The light exploded near the students, startling everyone, including our protagonist, until nothing else could be seen because of the brightness. Nori slowly began to open his eyes, still with some difficulty. He was on his knees, wondering what the hell had just happened. Looking to the side, he stood up and noticed another light illuminating the place, which now seemed to be a beach. This light looked like a small sun. His thoughts were filled with doubt. He had been in his classroom just a moment ago. How could he be somewhere else so suddenly? The other classmates had also been teleported, and they began screaming in despair, wondering where they were. While the students were confused and panicking, the protagonist looked behind him without saying a word, trying to understand what had happened to them. A woman with a divine appearance appeared before the students and asked everyone to calm down, saying she would explain their situation. That place was the Path of Souls, a place known as the Gap Between Worlds, and they would come to know her as the goddess. Confused, the MC simply watched and thought about what he had just heard. The other students around him were equally lost. Continuing, the goddess said they had been summoned to another world to become the heroes who would defeat the Demon King. No one understood what the goddess was talking about. This was all far too strange for them. Without further explanation, she said that soon their souls would be transported to the other world, called Burge, in the Empire of Hyjin. She began to ascend into the skies once again, leaving them just as confused as when she first appeared. The only one who seemed to fully understand what was going on was Nori. This was basically the plot of a novel. He gripped the book still in his hands. The goddess's final words were that each of them would receive a gift during the short time they could remain in that place. The goddess's hands hovered over each of the boys, and their reactions varied, but all of them seemed to be receiving some kind of power. The power she was granting was a special ability compatible with the world they were going to, but they should be careful not to become intoxicated by it. Disappearing right after, she wished them good luck, and then we see the exterior of a castle. Inside, all the students from that classroom appeared, among many other people, warriors, and even the king of that place. A priestess, clearly exhausted and panting, began celebrating, saying she had successfully completed the summoning. Amazed, the nobles began celebrating as well, happy to see that their world would now be saved by the hands of summoned heroes. A firm voice called for silence, and we see that the one who said it was the king. He rose from his throne and thanked the boys for accepting to come to them in order to help the kingdom. But they didn't have a choice at all. Strange, isn't it? Introducing himself, the man said he was the Emperor of Hyjin, Lysen Hyjin. Still grateful, everyone there in the throne room kneels before that bunch of idiotic teenagers and asks them to defeat the Demon King. Nori notices all that pomp in their reception. Here, everyone was being treated as if they were nobles. One of the students approaches the emperor and politely asks him not to kneel before them like that. With doubts, the boy asks if they will be able to return to their world after this. Someone approaches them saying they will answer that question in the emperor's place. The priestess says that all of them can return to their original world and introduces herself as Asia. Continuing, she says that after a month, when the moon is full again, they will be able to return to their world. Those who do not wish to fight against the Demon King can stay there in the castle until the full moon returns so they can be summoned back to their world. This makes the MC think that this seemed to be just a tourist trip for some. A girl asks if that same amount of time will pass in their world. The priestess explains that they will return to the exact same point in time at which they were summoned, and their original world's timeline will not change. Nori becomes very suspicious of all this convenience and starts wondering what the catch was. Asia asks if anyone there would like to return to their world after the month passes, saying that whoever wants to go back will not be stopped. Even so, she makes one last appeal for those kids to save their world. A solitary tear runs down her face as she asks. The MC thinks this is the moment when someone should step forward as a self-centered hero who will motivate everyone to follow him, like in the cliche. No one seems to have moved a single muscle, and Nori wonders if no one would be that kind of person. The boy with glasses apologizes and says that making this decision immediately is too difficult, and asks them to give everyone a month to think about it. Observing silently, the MC thinks that everyone there was being quite sensible before making that decision and says he feels the same way. Decided, the emperor says they will have this month to decide whether they will stay or return to their world. But today is a day of celebration and everyone should enjoy it. That excites everyone, and the fat guy in the room even starts drooling from excitement. Relieved, the MC thinks they are being treated very well, and they will even be able to enjoy the cuisine of another another world, but all this kindness makes him suspicious. He starts imagining that the food there might have all kinds of fantasy ingredients like dragon eggs and things like that. A magic circle appears on the ground beneath everyone's feet. He knew something was off. The MC looks at the ground, confused. Not worrying too much about it, he starts thinking about the conveniences of having a teleportation system like that. Their logistics must be better than Earth's. Pensive, he begins to say he's quite excited to see everything in this world. One of his classmates approaches him, a bit nervous, and he looks back to see what it is. The boy was going to ask why he was the only one with a magic circle under him, but it starts glowing even brighter. Quickly, the MC realizes something is wrong, but it is already too late. He was back on the path of souls. This place was already familiar to him. A voice greets him, saying this is the path of souls. The voice was about to introduce itself again as the goddess, but she stops talking when she sees the MC. He greets her, saying they have met again. Confused, she asks if he hadn't passed through there just recently, and he confirms, ending the chapter. The goddess is bewildered, wondering why this is happening. Sitting on the floor, he asks her if this means he will be summoned somewhere else again, and she replies that probably yes. Placing her hand on the MC's head, she says that in any case, there is still the rule that she must give him a gift before he is summoned. Stepping back as the summoning circle appears again, she tells him to hang in there, even with doubts, which he thinks is irresponsible of her. The new summoning location was now a normal building. Lightning was striking it, and it was nighttime, or was it just dark because of a storm? Thinking about it for a moment, he notices that the new summoning circle was yellow and had slight differences in its patterns compared to the first one, which was purple. Strangely calm, the MC says that this wasn't the most important thing to worry about right now, and we see that he is tied up and gagged in a chair. A bald man, looking like a mad scientist, approaches him, surprised that the summoning had actually worked. Another scientist looks at the MC and says they will call him test subject number 12. The bald scientist examines the protagonist more closely and says he seemed to possess an ocular offensive magic. Sensing danger, Nori realizes that being called a test subject was not a good sign. This summoning ability seemed far too dangerous for so many worlds to be using it. The two lunatics were excited about the MC and already wanted to perform experiments on him, then began picking up some very strange tools to use on the boy. It wasn't hard to see that those two were completely insane, Nori thought. With a scalpel in hand, the mad scientist says he will conduct an experiment on his magic eye. If someone said that where I live, they'd get beaten up. The man explains that there are records stating that humans summoned from another world receive a magic eye after crossing worlds. Showing his collection of blades hidden in his robes, he says that their job was to prove that this was true. Understanding the situation, the MC thinks that this magic eye was the power he had received when he was summoned to this world. Creating a magic circle in his hand and pointing it at the MC, the lunatic says it would be terrible if he went into an agitated state and lost control. He was going to put the MC into a state of hypnosis. The circle with the drawing of an eye had that purpose. Some time passes as the old man tries to put the MC into hypnosis. In disbelief, he realizes that the magic's effect on the boy was practically non-existent. He hadn't been affected at all and remained awake. That should have been a highly advanced hypnosis magic, but even the MC could tell it wasn't all that impressive. The other doctor, startled, shouts to get the bald man's attention. He notices that each of the MC's eyes had a different type of magic eye, one related to time and the other to truth. This shocks the bald scientist, who becomes delirious with excitement. This specimen was extremely rare for having two magic eyes at the same time. Decided, the old man says they will proceed with the experiments even without hypnosis and orders them to start the tests immediately. Awake, the MC thinks this was complete madness. These wouldn't be tests. They'd basically be torture. He didn't want to just stay there tied up and do nothing about it, so he tried to move to escape, but he was very securely restrained. A green circle appears on the floor beneath the MC. The two scientists look at the protagonist, shocked and confused. His restrained clothes begin to unravel, and Nori realizes he is being summoned once again to another place. Once more, Nori is back on the path of souls. The goddess already looked embarrassed to see him again. She asks if this was already the third time, and if perhaps he liked her, but the MC decides to play Thanos and says he is inevitable. Very funny. Curious, he asks if she had any idea what was happening to him. Thinking for a moment, she confesses that this is the first time she's seen something like this happen, and says she'll tell him when she has more information about it. This leaves the MC even more concerned. Were they still going to meet more times? What kind of incompetent goddess wasn't omniscient? Once again, he seems to have been summoned into a medieval place. His summoner appeared to be a noble little girl, along with an older woman who seemed to be an elf. The elf praises the little girl's talent for being able to summon a humanoid monster on her first try, which makes the little girl very happy. Nori gets annoyed at being called a monster. In that place, he had been summoned as a monster and was even forced to make a subordination contract. But before that contract could be finalized, the boy was summoned to another world once again, this time with a red circle. Smiling, he greets the goddess, saying that it had happened again, and she was clearly starting to get tired of this madness. He then asks her if she had discovered the reason for so many summons happening only to him. She says she has an idea and will explain quickly. All summoning targets are people who typically have a strong soul, as that was necessary to cross between worlds. What happens is that the protagonist has a type of soul that is both extremely rare and extremely strong. Slightly incredulous, he says he's not any kind of saint, much less a particularly good person. She says that it doesn't matter. To put it simply, the strength of a person's soul is the only thing that matters for the summoning to be successful. Adding another power to the MC's body, she says that if his soul were bound to a world through a hero contract, this would stop happening. Once again, he is summoned to some kind of medieval castle, the red light of the summoning circle visible through one of the windows. A small girl, wearing a princess crown and holding a crystal ball, says that he had a skill called skill theft. Opening his eyes, the MC is impressed to see such a beautiful girl in front of him. On his 4th summoning, he had also received a new skill. His hands were glowing pink, as if some power was emanating from them. Nori was about to make a contract with the beautiful girl he had seen so he could stop being summoned, but it was already too late. A new circle, this time black, appeared under his feet. He was being summoned once again. The place where he was summoned didn't look medieval this time, but rather like an abandoned location. On his 5th consecutive summoning, he had been called to that world using dark magic, and a weird gothic girl was panting in front of him. But before she could even recover from the exhaustion, the MC was already being summoned once again, and by now he had even stopped worrying about it. The scene changes, and now we are at the peak of a mountain in a place that looks like hell from how red it is. That was the 6th summoning, but he was already heading to the 7th. I was right, it really was hell. The demons were celebrating the resurrection of the Demon King, and he had become him. Back on the path of souls, the goddess says that his abilities had truly become incredible. He looks at his hand, wondering if that's true. The goddess then says that the next summoning will be the last. He asks excitedly if she's being serious. She explains that she will merge the powers he has received so far, so he should check his status immediately after the summoning with his right eye. The sky in this place was clear, and we see yet another generic castle that looks more like it's made of children's toy blocks. Someone shouts in joy at the summoning of the hero, but the MC doesn't seem very confident he's going to stay there. Something catches his attention. This time he wasn't summoned alone, and there seemed to be 3 other kids with him. The first boy, named Ryudo Shinzaki, looks around, wondering if that's a castle. The second girl, Tamaki Kurosawa, recognizes the other 2 and calls them by name, looking at them with a blank expression. The third girl, named Ewe Isogai, also recognizes her 2 classmates. The 3 teenagers chat among themselves in front of the king, while the MC is behind them, sitting silently. Confused, the king says that according to legend, only 3 heroes should be summoned to that world. This catches the protagonist's attention. He starts to feel depressed, realizing that 4 people had been summoned there, and they all seem to know each other, which leaves the MC excluded. Furious, the boy shouts, wondering why he was the only one to be summoned randomly until now. Why had this only happened to him? The 4 of them stand before the king's throne, with the MC standing a bit farther from the other 3 kids. Alarmed, the king asks if the 3 there were the heroes and the boy standing apart was just some ordinary person who had been brought to their world. The MC agrees with that. This was the first time the king had ever heard of a story like this. Someone standing next to the king steps forward and asks if they are heroes from another world. A little girl with sundeer-like hair shouts, saying that she, the first princess of the kingdom, had personally summoned them, and they should be grateful to her. Curious, the MC sees that this girl seems rather annoying. Excited, she shouts that this was their country, the kingdom of the rising sun, while the king rests his head on one hand as he sits on the throne. The princess explains that in this world there are humans, demi-humans, and demons, the latter being the natural enemies of mankind. Led by the Demon King, they created a nation and are invading human lands, causing massacres and spreading terror. But what a generic Isekai speech. Still explaining, she says that this is why the Makard Empire, the leaders of the Human Federation, petitioned all the Reunists to summon the heroes. However, only women with royal blood have the power to summon people from another world. In this case, that summoner was her. Each country would have to train the hero they summoned, creating an army of heroes to fight against the Demon King's hordes. Pleased with herself, she asked if that wasn't a brilliant plan, expecting the others' approval. Nori had realized that this strategy was terrible because they focused on quantity instead of quality, hoping to win by sheer numbers. Finishing her speech, the princess ordered them to grow stronger to defeat the Demon King in the name of the land of the rising sun. Nori found that name laughable. Stepping forward, Shinzaki asked if he could pose a question to the princess. Curious, he asked the same thing the MC's classmate had asked. Was there a way for them to return to their original world? The question caught the girl off guard, but her answer was simple. There was no way to return, which shocked the 3 unfamiliar students. In an irritating tone, she remarked that they should be grateful for the opportunity to become heroes of the world instead of wanting to go back home. Annoyed, Nori thought this was ridiculous and should be written in the terms of use of the Kingdom of Hagen. The king then told them to place their hands on a tablet to confirm which heroic blessings they had received upon arriving. An acolyte wearing purple robes approached them, carrying an object that looked like a stone tablet. Watching from a distance, the MC waited for the other boys to test their blessings first. Shinzaki had received the blessing of Limit Break. Aoi Isogai had received the Magic Barrier. Tamaki had received Magic Affinity. Then it was his turn. Inori placed his hand on the tablet, and it revealed that his blessing was Detection. He had a blessing just like the others, so he couldn't be considered a random nobody, and that seemed to leave the king a little confused. Even so, this ability didn't seem all that great. Would he have to become some kind of rogue in this story for it to be useful? Sometime later, the 4 boys were put to the test to measure their magical and physical abilities. Ryu had demonstrated some superhuman abilities during the physical tests. He could cut through logs with no difficulty at all. Aoi showed extraordinary results in magic measurements, as did Tamaki, who also achieved results beyond those of ordinary humans. For the protagonist protagonist there was nothing to show. Even though he had magic, he didn't seem to have any particularly impressive talent with his blessing. He couldn't even demonstrate physical strength. It seemed to have actually worsened from the repeated summons he had been through. To be honest, it was embarrassing for him to be weaker than even the girls, but it didn't matter much, since they were all heroes. That night, they decided to gather in Ryu's room to plan for the future. The MC entered the other boy's room, noticing it was bigger than his own. Tamaki asked why the protagonist was there. He wasn't even one of the heroes, so it didn't make sense for him to be there, since he wouldn't help with anything. Those words were sharp, but he preferred not to say anything. She seemed to have a bit of its tsundere personality, because she quickly said it wasn't like she was worried about him, even though she seemed to be. Sighing in relief, the MC simply thought she wasn't very honest. Rei replied to the girl, saying that the protagonist's detection ability was actually quite important. Observing silently, the MC noticed that each of them seemed to have a certain level of respect or regard toward him. Continuing, Ryu said that in terms of combat, the protagonist was very weak, but Aoi's magic barrier should protect him without problems. Looking at Ryu, Aoi said that if he thought so, then she would accept his command. She seemed to be in love with him and was quieter and prettier than Tamaki. Either way, he realized that all three of them were actually very attractive, as if they had already won in life. Tamaki changed the subject and asked if it was really fine for them to stay in that country. The other two boys couldn't answer. They stayed silent. Rei said that the country wasn't bad. They were treated well by the nobles. Finally, the protagonist spoke, asking Tamaki what her problem was. In her hand was a notebook, and inside it was a warning that they were being monitored, so it was better not to say anything suspicious. Shocked, the other three boys immediately fell silent. He gave a smug smile. His detection blessing was really starting to prove extremely useful to all of them. It was great to know that the ability was convenient. He could sense the presence of any creature nearby, even through walls. For example, right now he could feel the presence of someone listening to them through the door. He had sent the maids away from the room when he arrived there, because their meeting would be very private. There were only two possibilities after that. Either the maids had come back to listen, or someone else was spying on them. The MC keeps writing. Inori asks Aoi if she could create a soundproof barrier. It wouldn't hurt to test it. The girl nods that she will try as he asked. Raising her hands, a green barrier begins to be conjured from that point. She was making a great effort to create that barrier. Quickly, Aoi says that it's working as the MC wanted, but she still wasn't strong enough to keep it up for long. Ryu becomes visibly excited and thanks the girl for her effort, which makes her very happy. The MC watches this scene a little irritated, preferring that this flirting between the two stay outside the barrier. Annoyed, Tamaki asks why they were listening to their conversation from behind the door, but the MC explains that things might not yet feel real to her. The power they possessed as heroes was a threat in that world, as they could easily take control of nations. It was very clear why they were listening to their conversations. Furious, the girl complains that they were summoned there against their will. Inori explains that the country was probably in desperation, leaving the other two confused. The MC still wasn't sure since he didn't know the terms that world used, but he believed the country was on the verge of financial collapse. On one hand, the king was taking a very big step by being involved in this, and the number of guards and vassals in the castle was small. Calmer, Tamaki says she noticed the same thing, but at least their food was really good. It had plenty of garlic and spices and tasted great. Thinking about it, the MC wonders if it really tasted that good, or if his palate just wasn't used to that cuisine. Inori says that the room was still too simple for someone who should be considered a hero, even if it was bigger than his. Remembering his first summoning, he notes that compared to the first castle, this place was extremely plain. Quickly, he says they need to consider the possibility of having to leave that place, so they need an escape route. With his detection skill, he could avoid the surveillance network and then figure out how to return to his world. The MC explains that the four of them were probably the only hope for that place, so they wouldn't allow their only hope to leave. Even if they said there was no way to return to their original world, they could be lying, though it was probably not a simple process. Ryu says he thinks the same. They were still weak and ignorant about that world, so from now on they needed to stay alert to the situation they were in. Tamaki approaches him, leaving the MC confused. Was she going to kiss him after he had just shown how smart he was? Looking closely, she comments that the protagonist's eye is yellow and asks why it's like that, and he finally remembers his abilities. Irritated, he wonders how he could have forgotten something so important. A Japanese person with a yellow eye was far too strange. Interrupting the MC's thoughts, Ryu tells Tamaki that everyone has things they don't want to talk about. Ryu says she was going through a phase, so he asks the MC not to mind and tells Tamaki to leave Inori alone. The boy realizes that Ryu believes he has 8th grader syndrome and is using some kind of yellow contact lens to pretend he has powers. Accepting that, he just decides he will pretend that's exactly what's going on, so he won't have to give further explanations, then talks about his evil eye. Back in his room, he starts wondering what his evil eye does. He remembers he can check his status using his mind. The system screen appears in front of him, showing his attributes, and we see that he is now the demonic race, a Baron rank vampire. At a glance, it was possible to judge that his numbers were quite high, but he had no way of knowing how high if he didn't know the limit. This was very strange because in the training he had done, he couldn't demonstrate any extraordinary aptitude, even with those numbers. Wanting to understand a bit more, he goes to check his skills, which were many, but we first see only 2. theft, and dark magic. Of course, he still had the detection skill. This was all the result of being summoned so many times, since the goddess had merged his abilities. Analyzing, he realizes that maybe one of his abilities was related to the moment he had been summoned as a humanoid-type monster. He was a demon, and at the same time, a vampire. He opens his mouth, revealing his noticeably sharper canine. Another ability was called Hatred of the Sun God, which reduced his stats during the day, explaining his weakness during those training sessions. That was the reason he had been feeling so weak and on the verge of fainting in the middle of the tests. The dinner he had thought was terrible was because the cuisine contained a lot of garlic. In other words, the protagonist was a basic vampire. Thinking more calmly, he began to notice the nuances and differences between himself and the other boys. He'd have felt strangely drawn to the blood running through the girls' veins, especially in the lower part of their necks. At that moment, he was so focused on using his detection ability that he couldn't analyze the rest of the changes happening inside him. The strange eye and the fact that he had become a vampire. He was forgetting about his own characteristics, and he needed to learn more about himself. His mind began recalling all the moments he had been summoned, and he started analyzing all the abilities he had gained. He could detect living beings within the range of his detection ability. In addition, by consuming magical energy from materials, he had the power to create weapons, and he tested it by transmuting a candlestick in his hand. The protagonist managed to create a dagger from that candlestick and was quite impressed with the result. His eyes had two abilities. His right eye possessed the mystic eye of the poet, which granted incredible vision-based abilities. Whoever wanted to see them all would have to pause the video. He was impressed by the absurd number of abilities that just that one eye had, but the other was still left. Inori couldn't fully grasp the extent of his yellow eye's powers, which was called the mystic eye of truth. The system informed him that magical circles seen through this eye could be transferred to his pupil and activated whenever he wished. That was still very confusing to him, but the boy decided to learn about the magic of that world at another time. There was still a wide range of abilities he hadn't analyzed yet. Many of them he couldn't even understand, so they would be looked at later. Chuckling a bit, he remarked to himself that he could barely understand the concept of being a vampire, let alone this absurd number of abilities. Some things, however, were clear. Draining someone completely of blood would turn them into a ghoul, and if it were a virgin, she could become a vampire under certain conditions. If he killed someone and then dripped a little of his blood onto the corpse, they would become a servant, very similar to Deo Brando's powers. Finally, if he drank all the blood, he could obtain the memories of the creature in question. He was apparently a complete monster. On top of that, he could also steal the abilities of anyone whose blood he completely drank, making himself even stronger. His powers could only be accessed in full if he was active at night. That would make him quite powerful, and it left the boy a little excited to test those powers. But that wasn't the right time. Before anything else, he still needed to adapt his body to that world. The day began with new training, this time in martial arts. A blonde woman, beautiful, I'm in love, sorry, moving on. Her name was Ejiana Ichida, but I'll call her the blonde, said she would be training them from today onward. Inori watched the blonde, finding it curious that the commander of the kingdom's army was a woman. But what a sexist thought. It was entirely possible for this kind of thing to happen in a fantasy world, but was it due to the kingdom's issues or just marketing? Ignoring the MC's crazy thoughts, the blonde noted that the girls' aptitudes leaned more toward magic, but said they still needed to learn martial arts. Normally, she would start with strength training, but she didn't think that would be necessary for summoned heroes. Annoyed, the MC agreed reluctantly. Glancing at the other boys, he could see all of their stats and noticed their numbers were quite high, though not that much higher than his own. All of them had exceptional aptitudes compared to normal humans. Calling the three heroes, the blonde said they could choose what best suited their combat style after the training. Inori, on the other hand, was different. This comment left the MC confused, and she said he needed to increase his strength level, so he would be doing the basic training. He started doing push-ups under the blonde's supervision, like an ordinary soldier, and he immediately obeyed. Who wouldn't obey such a beauty? Because he was a vampire, daytime training drained all his strength, and sunlight gave him headaches. It could be worse. He could sparkle like Edward. Watching his training, she says she wants him to take it seriously because she was personally training him, and he keeps doing push-ups. The protagonist's head starts to feel strange. This training wouldn't be easy at all. It's worth remembering that he's 90% weaker during the day. Drawing everyone's attention, the princess approaches with maids and another unfamiliar girl, politely asking everyone for a moment. Inori was already irritated to see that girl there to bother them. Looking more closely, he notices the presence of the other girl, who seems much more beautiful and reserved than the annoying princess, and wonders who she was. Considering she was accompanied by maids, it's possible to imagine she was also a princess, and she really was very beautiful. Even so, her expression was very stiff, like a doll with a fake smile. The commander approaches the two and greets them politely, asking what brought the princesses there. Taking the opportunity to rest a bit, the protagonist observes the scene, imagining the two of them were princesses of that kingdom. Smiling, the other girl says she was there just to observe the hero's training. That Sundeer princess says they should be grateful for the privilege of having her there to visit them. This seems amusing to the protagonist because she used the same speech as the day before about others being grateful for her presence. The doll princess approaches the MC, greeting him and calling him by his name. She says she is the second princess of the Kingdom of the Rising Sun and that it's a pleasure to meet him. She is truly very beautiful, even with a fake smile. Kneeling before the MC, she says that this afternoon she will talk to him, and Inori is confused but doesn't show it to her. The scene changes, and now we are in the castle chamber of the Kingdom of the Rising Sun. The second princess is with them, saying they will now have lessons there. Inori seems a little irritated by this, as he was the only one having private lessons with her. The three heroes were having a class with the first princess, the Sundeer, in another room, and the reason was quite simple. Arrogantly, the first princess says she would never teach someone who wasn't a hero, as she was too important to grace the MC with her presence. He remembers that and becomes even more irritated, thinking he will get his revenge on her someday. The lesson was about to start now. She takes a small pointer to play the teacher with him. Inori raises his hand and asks to be able to ask a question before the lesson begins. Smiling, she says he can ask. The boy then asks if she is the younger sister of the first princess, since she is the second princess. She replies no, but due to some complicated circumstances, the heir to the throne was, in fact, the first princess. Thoughtful, the MC understands it was really something complicated, but decides not to delve further into the matter. With the book open, he thinks that royal succession issues are always far too troublesome. According to the second princess's explanation, the Kingdom of the Rising Sun had a very interesting history. It was created by one of the heroes who defeated the previous demon king, which meant it was founded by a female mage. In other words, the founder of their nation was a witch, which led to a culture of witch worship and made society mostly matriarchal. The throne was passed through the female lineage. Considering this fact, the king acted more as a regent than someone with actual rights to the throne, though he was the one who ruled the nation. Even so, he could lose all his rights if there were a divorce between the two. Inori had learned all this from the second princess's lessons. She had also taught him the basics of magic, but he seemed quite bored with these lessons, so he ended up sleeping through them. Night arrives, and the full moon illuminates the whole castle. Tomorrow will be interesting for learning about the ideology of magic, so that practical magic training can then begin. Inori had borrowed the second princess's book to study a bit about magic in that world. He thinks that sleeping through her class and borrowing her book seems rude, but she didn't seem to mind either thing. Turning his attention back to the book, he decides to start trying some tests he hadn't been able to do before due to lack of knowledge. The boy then activates his mystic eye of truth. After activation, the magic circle from the book begins to glow, indicating that the MC was storing that magic in his eye, allowing him to use it whenever he wished. Looking up, he tries to activate the magic, but it doesn't work. He can't even feel that the magic was stored in his eye. He tries with other different spells, but the result remains the same. Closing the book, the MC feels like a complete failure, already giving up on using that ability. Suddenly, he remembers his other eye and activates it. Looking to the side, he sees some papers and a quill on the furniture next to him. Inori takes the paper and quill and begins to redraw the circle he had seen earlier. With the help of that eye, he could perfectly recall its shape, so it wouldn't be difficult. In a world where he had obtained those two eyes, he could even memorize the magic circle he had seen in the hands of the mad scientist. He was going to try using that advanced hypnosis magic the scientist had tried to use on him. Normally, it would be impossible for him to memorize this so quickly. Thanks to the photographic memory, which was one of the eye's abilities, this had become child's play for him. That magic circle was exactly the same as the one he had seen in the world where he had obtained the magic eye. His yellow eye suddenly begins to glow and emit small sparks of electricity. This was a sensation the MC had never felt before. Could it be that he had actually succeeded in storing the magic this time? Wanting to test if he could really use the yellow eye, he rings his bell to call one of the maids. A beautiful red-headed woman appears before him, asking if he had called her. The girl's name was Nala. The protagonist extends his arm toward her while sitting on his bed, saying he wanted to ask her a favor. Looking directly at the girl, his eye activates the magic, hitting her without difficulty and leaving her slightly confused. The next moment, the magic circle had been conjured inside her eyes, making her expression look strangely relaxed. Suspicious, the MC stands in front of her, waving his hands to test if the magic had really worked. I know how he could test it, but I'm not saying. Inori asks Nala what color her underwear was today, and she immediately answers that it was black. Activating his X-ray vision, he confirms that what she said was true. The MC asks the girl's underwear color without hesitation. A man of culture. He then starts thinking about how he managed to activate the Eye of Truth and the hypnosis ability while the girl was still standing there. Suddenly, the MC wonders if perhaps he can only store spells in the Eye of Truth that come from the world where he obtained the magic eye. If that's the case, then the only ability he would be able to store would be advanced hypnosis. This deeply frustrates the MC. It can't possibly be just that, so he goes back to drawing with the quill. The boy had been summoned so many times to so many different worlds. It would be irritating for such a good ability to be useless wherever he ended up. He could perfectly remember the magic circles used to summon him to each world. So was the magic eye his very first ability? Activating the Eye of Truth again, he manages to store a summoning circle. Immediately, a yellow circle appears beneath him, and the magic was activated again. The protagonist is then summoned into an unknown place, a clearing in the forest near the capital city where he was. He uses a combination of the abilities of both his eyes. With this, he could travel to that place as many times as he wanted. It was nighttime, and the MC decided to test the various abilities he had at that moment, when his powers were at their maximum potential. Placing his hand on a wall, he activates his dark magic. The objects he touched begin to be controlled telekinetically through the magic, without any effort on his part. Any substance or inanimate object could be dominated by the power of darkness he possessed. He could also store these objects inside his shadow. Although he couldn't influence undominated objects using the ones he had already dominated, if he stopped the domination, he could still influence them. This power was strange, in the MC's opinion. He couldn't decide whether it was convenient or not. In my opinion, telekinesis is very convenient. His shadow had another ability involving dark magic and movement. He could use his shadow as a portal between shadows and move easily between them, which is completely broken, don't you think? This was amazing, and the internal space inside the shadow universe was quite spacious. Now it was time to acquire new skills. The MC uses his dark magic to telekinetically pick up a stone. He begins using his weapon creation skill, which makes the energy that was once purple turn yellow and reshape the stone. A shining sword appears in his hands, and he wonders if this will be enough. Inori remembers the training from that day, when he had used his mystic poet eye and memorized all the movements of the army commander. His goal here was to reproduce them exactly in order to train properly. The boy repeats the movements constantly, practicing whenever he has free time. At some point, something happens to his body. He feels a click, and it's perfect. The system window appears, informing him that he has gained a new skill, Swordsman Level 1. It was clear that eye could be used in the world he was in, but not in the way he had imagined. But now he needed to level up. Running through the forest, he stops behind a bush and begins to observe an animal in front of him. Watching carefully, he can't identify what kind of creature it was, so he assumes it's just a common monster. Using his eye, he activates the identification skill and is able to see the monster's stats. It had no name but was of the bird type. He's startled by the monster's attributes, but what catches his attention is the term Keko, which was a specialty of the Kingdom of the Rising Sun. In this case, Kecho was the monster species, and its feathers were even used in the castle's pillows. He wonders how people from that kingdom managed to hunt creatures as strong as that one, and whether he should look for something weaker to start with. Looking around, he sees there are other monsters nearby that even look weaker, but they weren't. All of them had average stats between 500 and 600, and some even had numbers much higher than his own. There were only two options. Either the monsters in this area were exceptionally strong, or he was simply too weak. Which was the truth? In close combat, he might be able to defeat them, but in the not-so-remote possibility of facing several at once, it would be far too dangerous for him. Deciding to retreat for now, Inori heads back to the castle. At that moment, the sound of footsteps and shoes could be heard inside. Looking back, the blonde commander lifts her lantern to see who was behind her. Closing her eyes in resignation, she greets the second princess. Apparently, the girl was outside her room without her guards. Even inside the castle, she could still be in danger. Without wasting time, the second princess says she wants to speak with Ijeana about the fact that Inori and his group weren't using magic tools in training. The commander confirms it. The other three used normal weapons, while the MC focused on physical training, which she believed was the best option. Interrupting Ijeana, the princess asks if it wouldn't be better to just explain to him about magic tools right away, since he would use them eventually. Agreeing, the blonde says that magic tools can indeed make someone stronger, but relying entirely on that power was dangerous. At that moment, it was crucial for him to first build his physical and mental strength before depending on anything external. Only then would he be truly strong. The second princess stays silent for a moment. The next instant, she smiles and says she understands her reasons, apologizing for saying something unnecessary to the strongest person in humanity. Ijeana notices a small change in the princess's attitude and says she wasn't smiling like she usually did. This catches the girl off guard, but she says she's still smiling even now as she turns away to hide her face. Curious, Ijeana decides to ask the second princess, whose name they still don't know, what she thinks about the first princess. Looking at a portrait of the first princess, the second princess says she was obviously someone more suitable for the throne because of her qualities. Suspicious, the blonde asks if those are her true feelings, and the girl asks what she means by that. Carefully choosing her words, the second princess tells the blonde that no one ever knows where ears might be listening here. If she said something bad about the first princess, she could end up being punished for blasphemy. The commander then agrees. As the princess, whom we finally learn is named Aliyah, leaves, the commander bows in respect. Even so, she thinks the girl was worried for no reason and secretly asks her not to hesitate when the moment comes. 2 weeks had passed since the MC was last summoned, and the progress of the three heroes was going very well, as he observed from a distance. Ryuta was still deciding if the best weapon for him to use would really be the sword, and so he continued his training with it. Tamaki was learning magic techniques with a type of staff, since she also used it as a blunt weapon, which was unusual. Aoi was training with a bow and arrows. Normally an archer would need someone to defend them so they wouldn't be vulnerable, but she had no such problem. Watching the three train in such unconventional ways left the MC quite impressed. They might not be as useless as the heroes from Tate no Yusha. Ryuta was specializing in close combat. Tamaki was using a hybrid strategy, able to attack both from close and long range. Aoi was fast and could move easily without becoming vulnerable. The trio was very well balanced. The MC's martial arts training had started only a few days ago, but he was already specializing in daggers and throwing knives. In addition, he was also seeking to specialize in camouflage and trap disarming, a complete rogue. This made him wonder if the kingdom's plan was to turn him into a scout for their army, and he thought his detection ability was perfect for that. Speaking of abilities, he had been working to level them up on his own at night, hiding from everyone else. After much training, he had developed several combined uses for his abilities, such as remotely controlling the weapons he created. With this, he could throw a stone far away, and by the time it reached the target, it could already have transformed into a blade to eliminate it easily from a distance. It was interesting to see how much stronger his abilities were at night compared to daytime. This whole vampire thing was complicated. Looking at the moon, he wondered if this hatred for the sun god would fade as he leveled up. For now, he decided not to think about it and focus only on strengthening his abilities, starting to train his movement through shadows. A chicken-like claw appeared walking, and we saw that the bird-type monster was near where the MC was, feeding on fruit. Without the monster noticing, Inori approached it with impressive speed. In an instant, the MC emerged from the shadows and charged at the giant bird. A shrill cry echoed through the forest, but no one besides the MC was there to hear it, coming straight from the shadows. Inori had used his weapon creation and darkness enhancement powers, creating an imprisonment ability called Black Death Silk. The monster was completely bound and immobilized. Quickly, the boy forced the monster to look directly into his eyes and activated his hypnosis ability on it. Caught in the trap, the monster was hypnotized by the MC with ease. He was quite pleased to see that his ability didn't work only on humans. Inori approached the monster carefully. He could see that he could combine his abilities in countless ways. Living creatures could not be controlled with dark magic, so he took a knife and killed the creature right there. After it was dead, the MC could control the monster and move it as he wished using dark magic, and then he stored it inside his shadow. The MC then decided to enter as well, descending to the ground of this shadow dimension. He had already tested this before, and things were working as he had imagined. In that place, he didn't have to worry about other monsters, so he opened his mouth to drink the blood of the slain monster. Drinking the blood of other creatures could also increase his level, making him even stronger. It was possible he might gain more stats related to his vampirism by exercising it so much. Inori left his shadow dimension and looked at the place where he was. Right in front of him was another monster. It looked like a strange lizard sleeping peacefully in the night, determined to feed on it. The MC thought it didn't seem very tasty, but he wouldn't be picky this time. As long as this method worked, he would use it to grow stronger, and he did so until dawn began to approach. Exhausted from his night hunt, the MC used his teleport to go directly to his room to rest. He had been doing this for several nights. The red-headed maid arrived in his room, calling for him to wake up since the day had begun. He got up and thought he wouldn't use hypnosis on the girl unless it was strictly necessary, forcing himself to wake up for training. Even so, he had been using hypnosis frequently on the maid over the past 2 weeks to gather information about the kingdom. The current princess had trouble conceiving a child. The country was centered around the queen's bloodline, so it was necessary for the princess to give birth to a daughter to pass down the throne and sustain the kingdom. Strangely, the royal family tended to die young from illness, which led to a time when there was no one left to inherit the throne. Fearing the royal bloodline would end, the kingdom brought in a distant duchess to become the king's concubine. She gave birth to a child, and that child was Aaliyah. The meaning of her name was heir to the throne. By working hard and being diligent, she managed to earn the support and love of the entire kingdom's population. Unfortunately, when Aaliyah turned 7 years old, a daughter was born to the queen, who was the king's official wife. The name of that child was Amanda, which meant beloved. This name was given because she was deeply loved by the queen and had also inherited her magical powers. From that moment on, Aaliyah stopped receiving the education to become the throne's successor, an abandonment that is brutal for a child. When Amanda turned 7, she became the first princess. Unfortunately, this made Aaliyah's name lose its meaning, as she no longer had the attention or support of anyone for the throne's succession. Still a child, she began withdrawing from the presence of the nobles and isolated herself. Ignored by everyone, single, and abandoned by the queen, she began living a suffocating life, trapped inside the castle like a doll. Nothing more was expected of her, and this made the protagonist identify with her. Aaliyah calls Inori to wake him up. She says that knowledge is extremely necessary for survival. If he keeps sleeping like this, there's no point in him continuing to have lessons. Irritated, she asks if he had been learning to use his detection and concealment techniques better in martial arts training. He might not have magical talent, but he had a gift in that area. The MC watches her, silent and disinterested. Remembering, he commenced to himself that he couldn't use almost any type of magic belonging to that world. Even the simplest people could use magic. In other words, he was one of the rare people who couldn't do so. We found a new asset in the world. The captain of the guards was a very busy woman, says Aaliyah, and the fact that they were making time to train him was because they valued the MC. Disbelieving, Inori says this was probably just because he could be a bonus to the heroes. Irritated, the girl slams the table, saying that he can become stronger, so he shouldn't think he doesn't need to make more effort. These words leave the MC without a reply. Aaliyah stands up again and orders the protagonist to follow her. They descend a spiral staircase, as if heading towards some kind of crypt or dungeon. Reaching the bottom of the stairs, the sight before him leaves him speechless. A huge door with a strong glow coming from it stood before them, and Aaliyah was opening it. She informs him that today, instead of having normal lessons, they would be using that room. Aaliyah asks how he feels about the current situation. Being called weak even though he's a hero. Shouting angrily, she asks if that isn't pathetic. The MC, shocked, doesn't understand what was happening. Why had things suddenly turned out like this? Perhaps because of her past failures, the second princess felt this way. She had spent years hiding her emotions, which earned her the nickname Doll Princess. But now she was clearly showing her emotions to him, Would she do this in front of others? The lighting inside that room was very bright. There was purple light emanating from the ceiling through a magic circle, and the two of them entered the place. Aaliyah warns the MC that if things continue this way, he will be expelled from the castle, leaving Inori confused. The kingdom's leaders didn't believe they had any obligation to help an incompetent who made no effort. Inori still doesn't believe her words and says that his detection skill was far too useful for him to be discarded. Aaliyah agrees with him, but there was something else he wasn't considering. He wasn't making an effort in the kingdom's eyes. Even if he was blessed with that skill, he would have to try a little harder. Didn't he agree with that? Inori remains silent. We know that he had been training a lot, but only at night and hidden from everyone in the kingdom. He begins to remember that, indeed, in everyone's eyes, he wasn't showing the slightest bit of effort. Even so, he knew of his own effort, especially because he had been leveling up constantly. The boy says he was doing his best. He wasn't a hero in the same sense as the other three, and he also had no talent for studies. This was the best he could do. Aaliyah then changes the subject and says that the room they were in had a magic barrier protecting it. No one would come there, no matter how much someone screamed. The MC then asks her how to open that door, but she was already behind him. Furious, the girl lifts her leg and kicks the protagonist in the back. The boy is thrown against the wall, confused about what had just happened. Deeply irritated, she says that Inori's situation is not as hopeless as hers. If he were expelled from the castle with his current abilities, he would end up being killed by the monsters nearby. He needed to survive. At that moment, the MC realizes she was no longer the doll-like princess who never expressed her true emotions and motivations. Standing before him was a proud and noble woman. Shouting, Aaliyah tells the MC that he can change if he wants to. He just needs to pull himself together and act like the hero he's supposed to be. This excites the MC. He starts laughing in front of her, with a hand on his head, like a lunatic, which makes Aaliyah doubt the boy's sanity. Inori then says she was a good woman, which makes her blush and panic, and you know the rule. If she blushes, she's in love. Excited, the boy says he had underestimated her. She was much stronger than he had imagined. Incredulous but still blushing, she asks if Inori was mocking her at that moment. The MC says she can relax now. His obsession with his own life was far greater than that of the other boys who came with him. He says it was basically the same obsession she had. This surprises the girl. He had managed to read who she really was with ease. Smiling, Aaliyah says that, apparently, she was the one who had underestimated the protagonist. At that moment, the MC was emanating his potential energy, which made the girl realize he was much stronger than he let on. Inori agrees that he is probably on the verge of being expelled from the castle and says he will think of a way to reverse it. He had no interest in being exiled, even if he could survive outside with ease, so he needed to gather more information. Back at the kingdom's training grounds, the MC was giving his all, even though sunlight made him much weaker than he actually was. To avoid his expulsion, he needed to show everyone the true value of his detection blessing. Knowing there would be no dungeon exploration training for a while, he needed to find another solution. The blonde finally announced the end of the training. Inori was exhausted at the end of it all, panting and wondering if he should try asking the commander to dissuade the queen from expelling him from the kingdom. The boy calls for Egiana, who turns to see what he wanted. In the MC's eyes, that woman seemed to hold a lot of power within the kingdom. Already in her office, the first thing she says after Inori's request is that it might be difficult to do what he wanted. Inori then asks if his ability was truly that useless in the eyes of others. He even admits he lacks motivation in his training, but insists he could be very useful to the kingdom. But the blonde says that's not the case. Egiana wasn't underestimating his abilities. His problem was something else. With a stern expression, she asks if he had thought about joining the kingdom's knights, but this leaves the MC confused. His abilities weren't suited for combat, but he could be a great help to the knights, assisting in dungeons and even in the fight against the Demon King. What she meant by it being difficult to do what he wanted was that she didn't have enough authority to keep him in the kingdom as a hero. Finally, she explains that if he served the kingdom as a knight instead of trying to be an accessory to the heroes, there might be a second option. If he could stand on his own, he might be able to avoid expulsion from the kingdom. Joining the knights would essentially mean being bound to the kingdom forever, and that could be a bit complicated in the MC's view. Bowing in thanks, he says it was a generous offer, but it was still difficult to decide on the spot. Standing up from her desk, she says she understands, but if he ever finds himself with no way out, he could come to her. Inori asks if she's saying he can do that after being exiled from the kingdom. Facing away from him and looking out the window, she stays silent for a moment but then replies, maybe, with the kingdom's banner waving in the wind outside. A few days pass, and we are once again in the library where Inori usually has his lessons. He was still very tired, and with his eyes closed and head resting on the table, he asks if a hero from the neighboring kingdom had arrived. Sipping her tea, our dear waifu replies that yes, and that tomorrow there will be a welcome party. Aaliyah says she will have to attend, and because of that, there will be no lessons or training tomorrow. The MC says it's the first time he's hearing about it. Smiling artificially once again, she says that those who usually sleep through lessons don't need to be there, and that should explain why. Annoyed, he says he understands, since he already knows they're leaving him out on purpose. A huge reception takes place in the kingdom's surroundings. Green flags and soldiers arrive in a procession that seems to be from the neighboring kingdom, and they are greeted with celebration by everyone there. The red banner of the Kingdom of the Rising Sun is being waved by soldiers from atop the castle, announcing that everyone there is welcome. Inori is in one of the rooms, irritated, asking if the kingdom wasn't going through financial difficulties. He wished he could take part and wonders if he could slip in unnoticed at an event of that size. The problem was that showing up at such a party would force him to explain to the dignitaries of the other kingdom that he was an abnormal existence in the hero summoning. If that led to any kind of investigation to figure out what had caused this abnormality, it could become a huge problem. Sighing in irritation, the MC says he's not particularly excited about watching all these happy people. Even so, he decides to activate his mystic poet eye and observe the castle with his ability. He can see the two princesses beautifully dressed and cheerful as they welcome the guest. Inori doesn't seem very excited to see the two of them, even if they were so well presented at that moment. Observing Aaliyah's face carefully, he notices she once again has that doll-like expression. The food looks very beautiful and probably very tasty, which makes the MC somewhat wish he were there eating and celebrating with everyone. He remembers how Nara had explained it. Part of the kingdom's financial problems were caused by this party. The queen is so focused on demonstrating the kingdom's power to other nations that she no longer listens to the king's advice regarding the prudent use of the kingdom's resources. The MC's eyes noticed the heroes from the other kingdom. There were 3 of them. One was a young woman who appeared very charismatic, wearing 2 braids with a strong-willed personality and short hair. The other was a young man whose face was obscured by his hair, and the MC thinks he might get along with him. Still observing, he tries to see who the third hero was. It was a blonde boy who looked Japanese, and the MC decides to observe him more closely to try to evaluate him. His name was Date Masayoshi, which makes the protagonist think the name is a bit old-fashioned but fitting for a hero. He looked angry and was shouting something at Ryudo, so the MC tries to read his lips to understand what was happening. Date was shouting for them to bring Takafuji Inori to him immediately. He wanted to challenge the MC to a duel, for no apparent reason. This one was clearly already unstable. Aaliyah introduces Inori to Date. Everyone there was watching our MC since he had been called over after the party ended. The boy shouts at Inori, wanting to challenge him to a duel once again. Uninterested, the MC just looks at him without saying anything. No one was understanding the situation they were in. The 3 heroes who knew the protagonist seemed shocked by what had happened. Meanwhile, the 2 heroes from the neighboring kingdom were completely bewildered and confused by Date's behavior. Curious, Inori asks why he wanted a duel with him. Furious, the other boy shouts that he wants to prove himself to the goddess. He wanted to show her that he was worthy. Inori pretends not to understand what he is talking about, but the boy already shouts for him to stop pretending. It was obvious the MC had been there, in that white place. In an accusatory tone, Date asks Inori if he had met her too, when he was on the path of soul. Curious, the protagonist asks what that had to do with a duel. At that moment, as if pleased with himself, Date says he had proposed to her. Inori didn't seem to believe it, but the blonde confirms it's true, and that there was more. She had told him that if he could defeat someone named Fujitaka Inori, she might consider accepting his proposal. He seemed desperate as he shouted this. Finally, Inori understands the whole situation. That goddess had essentially directed that troublesome boy toward him, so she would not have to reject the proposal directly. Annoyed, the MC thinks that next time he meets that goddess, he will teach her a lesson. Ryudo looks at Tamaki and asks about this white space. The other 2 heroes who had come with Date also seemed equally confused. Seeing this situation, Inori understands they had not been summoned in the same way he and Date were, but explaining that would be too much trouble. He decides to go along with Date and pretend to be unaware to avoid giving further explanations. Inori says he does not really understand what he is talking about, but will accept his duel. Letting go of the boy's clothes, he becomes excited at this. The MC says they should decide the rules of the duel, which leaves the other boy exasperated. Inori explains that his abilities are not for combat, and unlike the other heroes, he does not have a special body. A direct fight would be unfair for him. If he were the type of hero who liked to take advantage of the weak, the story would be different, would it not? Still furious, the boy shouts not to make him laugh. He would accept any rule the protagonist imposed on him. At that moment, everyone in the room realizes just how simple-minded and imprudent Date is, which was almost embarrassing to watch. Inori says that near the kingdom's capital, there was a dungeon the knights used for training. Whoever defeated the first floor boss of the dungeon first would win the duel. Date immediately accepts the MC's proposal. Ryudo approaches him and asks if he is sure about this, since his abilities are not for combat. He would not be able to defeat the boss like that. Calmly, the MC says he does not need to worry, as he has a plan in mind, which leaves Ryu even more confused. The duel was scheduled for the next day, and then the boy returned to his quarters. After the duel ended, Inori was summoned to the throne room. He was kneeling before the king and queen. She asks if he was Inori, and begins her speech. Curious, the queen asks what the disaster in the dungeon had been. He had changed the duel stage and still been humiliatingly defeated. As the queen rightly said, that young man was truly strong. He cut down all the monsters with a sword technique comparable to Egiana's. The first floor boss had not even stood a chance against him and was easily defeated. Meanwhile, the MC had to use his detection ability to avoid monsters, traps, and even the dungeon boss entirely. That duel had already been destined to be a complete defeat for the MC, and yet he had accepted the challenge. The queen continues, saying that until now he had been tolerated despite being lazy and incompetent. He was only there thanks to the commander of the knights, who was trusted by the king and queen. but he had brought disgrace to the whole kingdom with his actions. That made her, the queen, unable to accept the situation any longer. Aaliyah watched this judgment, deeply frustrated. Decided the queen then informs Inori that from that moment on, he would be exiled from the land of the rising sun. What no one expected, except me, you, and everyone watching this video, was that the MC was actually aiming for this result, and he was pleased with it. The queen says he had caused great harm to that nation. After hearing the queen's verdict, everyone present looks at the MC. Amanda seems satisfied to see he had been exiled. Aaliyah lowered her head and kept her eyes closed, while Ajiana watched the scene with an impassive expression. Inori raises his head and looks at the queen, and she asks if he had any objections to her decision. The boy then says yes, he had an objection, which surprises the queen. He then says that she had stated he had caused harm to the kingdom, and he asks what harm she was referring to in that case. Pointing her fan at the boy, she asks if he hadn't lost the duel he accepted against Date. The MC then confirms that yes, he lost the duel, but there was something more to it that she wasn't considering. Only one thing had been at stake in that bet, and that was qualification. The queen asks what he was talking about. Inori says that the duel had been held solely to prove that its winner would be suitable for a certain woman. That was the duel's true purpose. More importantly, he wasn't a hero, and his very existence wasn't even known to other nations. He wasn't someone who could actually tarnish the reputation of the kingdom of the rising sun, or even her majesty's own name. To put it simply, this duel was nothing more than a mere farce. That rhetoric leaves the queen speechless. Furthermore, even if he hadn't won the duel, it wasn't as if he had done nothing there. Two soldiers approach the MC. The queen continues to watch in silence, listening to what the MC has to say. Confident, the MC presents two large sacks before her, one on each side of him. He says he had prepared a small gift for the queen, and with the sack half open, the gold coins inside can already be seen. Pushing the sacks forward, an absurd amount of gold coins spill onto the floor before the king and queen. Amanda and the queen are completely shocked to see all that money. Bowing, the MC says this was a treasure he managed to find on the first floor of the dungeon, to make up for having lost the duel. Picking up one of the coins near her, the queen shows she is quite pleased with Inori's actions. He had used his detection blessing to achieve this feat and says it was actually quite easy to do because of it. Inori had used the duel merely as an excuse to prove his worth to everyone there. That had been his true goal. Aaliyah was left open-mouthed, speechless, staring at the MC in disbelief over what he had just done. In the end, the hero from the other kingdom left satisfied, and the entire problem of the kingdom of the rising sun was resolved. Two birds with one stone. Night falls, and with it comes the MC's hunting time, where he is already feeding on the blood of several monsters in the area. The problem of his banishment was solved, and now he had more time to hunt, but there was still one problem left. Inori was starting to get tired of feeding only on Keko. Stopping his hunt for a moment, he looks around. The layout of that forest felt strange at times. With nothing but trees there, it was hard to notice, but his detection skill made him sense there was something odd about the place, though he didn't know what it was. Perhaps the problem was that he was using the wrong skill. Activating his mystic eye, he begins to scan the entire expanse of the forest. Excited, he says, "Bingo," having found something that caught his attention. Extending his hand, he seems to be touching some kind of barrier and wonders if this strange feeling was because he was using magic from this world. The evil eye of perception was a skill he had obtained that belonged to another world. Perhaps he was sensing something. Could it be that deeper in the forest he might find something even stronger than the Keko? Crossing through the barrier, he decides to take a look around that place and see what he finds. If anything happens, he can simply teleport back to his room. Apparently, tampering with that barrier awakened a different kind of monster in that region. A blue eye begins to shine in the darkness. Would this be a great hunt for the MC or just a pet? We'll see in the next chapter. The chapter begins with the MC completely crossing the barrier. Now he was in a totally unfamiliar area. He quickly notices something beside him and turns to see what it is. Several white wolves charge toward the boy, eager to tear him apart, and this startles the MC. Using his magic to escape them, he thinks it's the first time he has seen magical creatures appearing in a pack. Quickly, he uses his deadly silk to try to trap the creatures, creating a web to capture them all at once. The wolves were truly strong individually and even more troublesome to deal with in a group. Even though he defeated the monsters, it still wasn't an easy task to take them down without getting hurt in the fight. Putting the monsters into the Shadow Realm, he thinks that this way he might level up faster than with Keko, so he goes to drink their blood. Before entering the Shadow World, he looks up. The water in a small nearby lake begins to ripple. Inori observes it silently. The moonlight was illuminating a large tree right in the middle of that lake. From his expression, we can already tell he understood the whole cliche. It was as if a boss was about to appear. He decides to withdraw from there, not having the guts to deal with a boss. Unfortunately, his plans are immediately ruined, and a gigantic white wolf appears, roaring at the protagonist, almost biting off his head. The monster was really fast, because before Inori could understand what was happening, he had already been pulled back. In the next instant, his arm was no longer where it should be, and he still hadn't fully processed that information. Shocked, he looks at his arm, but the wolf was already moving again. The boy falls to the ground, and the wolf vanishes with a leap. With the force with which he was thrown, his body is flung far away, until it hits something that stops it. He is badly injured and dazed, and Inori wonders what had just happened, since he didn't even see the wolf's attack. With a beautiful blue aura emanating from it, the wolf appears in front of the protagonist, already ready to finish tearing him apart. The system informs him that it was a phantom beast, so it wasn't a common monster. He was beginning to weaken from the loss of his arm. Terrified, he realizes that this was a mid-level boss, and he probably wouldn't be able to handle such a major threat. Thinking quickly, he wonders if he should flee to the Shadow World. It could be a good idea, but if that thing waits for him, it would be dangerous. Before he can make any decision, the wolf charges at the protagonist with impressive speed. In the next instant, its gigantic mouth is already about to devour the protagonist entirely while he is still frozen, staring at it. The monster then buries its face into the tree where the protagonist had been, causing a massive explosion with the impact. Fortunately, he was no longer there, and the wolf realizes he had disappeared. Inori, with his bat wings open, which had never been mentioned in the story until now, is flying above the wolf. Watching from above, he remarks to himself that he rarely gets the chance to use his vampire powers and starts to recall the summoning that gave him that ability. The wolf begins to observe him from the ground and then asks the MC why he had come to where he was. Inori realizes that, being a phantom creature, it was natural for it to be capable of speech, even if only through telepathy. Clicking his tongue in irritation, the MC says one could say he got lost and ended up there by accident. Furious, the wolf yells at him, saying that was unlikely, as it was not easy to break through the illusion barrier of that place. The boy then replies that once he found the illusion, he got curious to see what was inside, since it couldn't be an ordinary place. With fierce eyes, the wolf says that if that were the case, then he was an intruder, and for having wiped out his kind, the wolf couldn't let him live. Observing from afar, Inori finds this behavior interesting. He says that by the tone of the wolf's voice, that place must be really important to him. Convinced of his victory, the wolf replies that he'll tell him about the place since the boy would soon be crossing over to the other side of life. That was a land in which they had made a pact with a witch. This makes the boy very curious, and he wonders what witch that could be. The wolf ignores the question and continues, saying that according to the pact, he had to protect that land. Because of this, they were always eliminating monsters that could threaten that place. Of course, the MC, as an intruder, was also something to be eliminated. If he stands still, the wolf promises to end him painlessly, but if he resists, then he will suffer unnecessarily, and there will be resentment. A new arm appears to replace the one the MC had lost, and he wonders if that's because he's a vampire, though he finds this regeneration quite convenient. Seeing this scene makes the wolf much more cautious and irritated, as that boy was proving to not be someone ordinary. Since that was the case, the wolf charges forward, shouting that he now had even fewer reasons to let the MC live. The monster was truly fast, and he was already in front of the MC, which scares him, making him try to dodge as best he can. With overwhelming force, the impact of the wolf's attack explodes the ground near where Inori was. Luckily, thanks to the protagonist poet's mystic eyes, he managed to dodge the attack, but even so, the wolf was very fast and he would have to be careful. Flying, the boy tries to distance himself from the wolf as much as he can to gain an advantage. He knew he wasn't as fast as the wolf yet, so he tries to create a path to confuse the monster and escape through the forest. His escape route was below, and the wolf quickly turned to look at him while he was still fleeing, but something caught Inori's attention as he flew. Several light projectiles were heading toward him at an incredible speed, striking him multiple times. That barrage of projectiles resembled Gilgamesh's noble phantasm and seemed to have hit the MC in several spots, also destroying a large portion of the forest. That boss was truly out of control, even though he hadn't even moved to cause that much damage to the boy. Inori fell to the ground and tried to look in the direction of the wolf. One of his eyes was closed, probably due to the pain he was feeling at the moment. With no time to think, he quickly realized the wolf was almost biting him again. If he didn't move soon, the story would end right here. Another massive explosion occurred, this one even bigger than the first two. That monster was absurdly strong. It was unbelievable. The monster's attacks were both powerful and incredibly fast. The protagonist even tried to use his hypnosis magic against it, but didn't have time to complete the spell. Looking for a way to escape, his eyes landed on a nearby waterfall. Flying as fast as he could, the MC felt desperate, wanting to get out of that place as soon as possible. He had teleportation magic, so why wasn't he using it? The wolf was on Inori's tail, and even while flying, he wasn't fast enough to escape the beast's claws. Multiple projectiles struck the boy from above. He couldn't even dodge or defend against them. One of his wings was hit, which would seriously affect his ability to fly. The wolf smiled, as if that were possible, but who cares about logic in a story like this? Charging forward, he shouted for the MC to head to his coffin already, with his mouth wide open, ready to crush the boy. Lying on the ground, his face turned toward the monster with a strange smile, while his hand was on the ground, summoning dark magic. Several spikes were conjured from the ground, heading toward the monster as it fell from above. The small spikes turned into massive, sharp beams. The wolf noticed the movement and at the last second managed to dodge being skewered by the stakes. He quickly repositioned himself and stared at the protagonist, who was satisfied that he had prepared that trap just in case. Even though he had escaped death for now, he knew his situation was far from favorable. His yellow eye seemed to be bleeding and was getting off smoke. Staring directly at the MC, the wolf began to growl with hatred toward him, and so the chapter ended. The monster stood still, closely observing the stakes, but remained silent. Inori, kneeling before him, within the trap, also observed cautiously, wary of the next move, and finally explained why he hadn't used teleportation. His magic storage ability from the genius eye was still occupied by the hypnosis spell he had used earlier against the lesser wolves. To change this, he needed to store a new spell in the eye, and then activate it. Summoning new weapons from the dark dimension, he thought his plan was to buy time so he could eventually use teleportation. The protagonist moved his hand toward the knives within his reach, preparing to fight. Still growling, the guardian wolf merely observed but chose not to advance, not yet. The knives hovered in attack position around him, controlled by his dark telekinesis. All he was thinking about was finding an opening in the fight. Channeling a bit more of his power, the knives went into a frenzy, moving in chaotic directions all at once. Surprised, the wolf saw all those weapons reaching his face but rushed toward the MC, demanding to know what he had done this time. The monster was still far too strong for the MC, and in the next instant, its claw passed dangerously close to Inori's back. He barely dodged it. More knives were summoned from the ground. While running, the protagonist hurled them behind him, trying at least to slow the monster down so he could escape. The wolf declared that it was useless. Such weak attacks would never work against him. Using his claws, the wolf unleashed a rapid series of normal punches, just like Saitama had incomprehensible speed. Inori couldn't dodge all the blows and began getting hit by some of them, but thankfully without exploding in the process. He thought he didn't need to dodge everything, just protect his legs and heart to escape. He believed the rest could regenerate. Behind the protagonist, the monster appeared once again, and the MC seemed to be lying on the ground, exhausted from the fight. Annoyed, the wolf said the boy was truly persistent and irritating. A strange barrier appeared in front of the MC. It looked like it was made of black threads with a purple aura. It was his combined magic, Black Death Silk. Several threads appear in the trees which were previously invisible to the eye. The threads latch onto the wolf's body, catching him by surprise. He becomes bound and unable to move, then lets out a massive roar that echoes throughout the forest. Inori starts to feel confident that the beast wouldn't be able to break through those magical threads. The boy couldn't have been more wrong. Even if the threads didn't break, the trees couldn't withstand the monster's strength and shattered into pieces. Not even the threads managed to hold the creature, and they broke as well. The wolf says that such an attack wouldn't even leave a scar on him, then charges at Inori once again. Desperate, the boy is in disbelief to see that the wolf was able to destroy his death silk magic. He thinks he has no choice but to use that method, whatever that method was. More projectiles are fired toward the MC, destroying several trees around him, but this time, apparently, he manages to avoid the shots. The wolf was nearly biting the MC's butt, but the boy was already using new threads in a different strategy. Flying as fast as he can, the MC begins to hope that the method he wants to use will work. Approaching a large tree, he leaps across its trunk several times and, at the end, jumps above the height of the forest, standing out under the moonlight. Looking up, the monster simply says the MC is an idiot for trying to flee by flying higher. Now that he's an easy target, he could simply jump toward the boy, who would have no way to escape. Just as the wolf is about to leap, the MC opens his Eye of Truth. The threads tied to the trees begin to take on a yellowish hue in various points across the area where they had been fighting. 3 giant magical circles appear beneath the wolf in a massive area of effect. Smiling, the MC finally manages to swap the spell stored in his mystic eye. Quickly activating it, the teleportation magic he so desperately needed is triggered, and at last he can escape the situation. The wolf watches in disbelief as the boy vanishes and wonders if he really managed to flee from him. Inori says that was his initial plan. Appearing behind the wolf, he says that before leaving, he'll at least say a proper goodbye. With a swift movement, he says it's time to say goodbye. Landing on the wolf's back with a single strike, the beast sees the blade reaching its eye. The piercing was perfect. Howling in pain, the wolf loses one of its eyes as Inori lands on the ground. Standing in front of him, looking at the monster, he says that just taking hits isn't his style. Even the monster's roar was powerful. He screams, asking if the MC was bold enough to make him cry, and the roar destroys the surroundings of the forest. Inori tries to escape the area affected by the roar, but it seems it won't be enough. Leaping away, he realizes the monster is truly enraged that he managed to damage its eyes. Watching from the top of a tree, he sees that the beast had its head turned in his direction. Could it still see him? Inori realizes that wasn't the case. It was simply tracking him by scent. That murderous intent from the beast was overwhelming and could paralyze someone weaker than him. Even blind, the monster manages to locate the protagonist's position and already has its jaws wide open, ready to destroy him. It was finally time to leave, so the boy begins activating his teleportation magic once more. Before the wolf can devour him, he vanishes completely, and all it manages to bite down on is the tree trunk where the MC had been. Furious, the beast realizes he has completely lost his target, but that next time the boy showed up there, he wouldn't spare his life. Back in the castle room, Inori was exhausted, panting, and wounded, with several wooden splinters piercing his body. He was still very weak. Even though this is a story about an overpowered MC, it's great to see him growing stronger instead of being strong from the start. Even if he didn't achieve more than slightly wounding that monster, the next time he returns there, he will win, says Inori. The next day finally begins, sunlight bathing the castle and starting a new journey. From that day on, Inori began working on rebuilding his equipment. He infiltrated the 5th Infantry's arsenal using his shadow dimension magic to see what he could snatch from there. Even with the power to create weapons, he takes some from the arsenal in order to use them as materials for his transmutation magic. And for emergencies, he had collected none other than the fur of that wolf, Fenrir. It had been difficult to do, but he managed it, and it was a very valuable item with several incredible properties for his spells. Inori grabs the fur with his hand and begins an assessment using his system. That fur could react with the following types of magic: crystallization, hardening, and miniaturization, and it would harden upon contact with magic. It was clear that this fur was the reason his attacks had no effect on that monster. An idea comes to his mind, and he decides to create a weapon using that material as the base. Several black threads appear above the MC, as if it were his Black Death Silk magic. That new weapon had its own name, Gleipnir, exactly like the magical chain made to capture Fenrir in Norse mythology. Upon analyzing it again, he realized it could never be broken, no matter how much force was applied to it. And with magic, it would crystallize. The MC knew the legend of Gleipnir and realized that not even that monster would be able to break this thread he had created. With that thread in hand, he had another idea. Using his weapon creation once more, he transformed the thread into a black glove with its properties. By using crystallization on the glove to make it glow only in certain places, he could create a visible magic circle and use it to store different spells. Inori looked at the glove and realized something. The author shamelessly copied Roy Mustang from Fullmetal Alchemist. Just kidding, he had another idea. Using the remaining thread he had created, he made an entire outfit, which looked quite vampiric if you looked closely. Finally ready, the MC thought that now was the time for revenge against that monster. Revenge for what? The beast had basically given him a gift with that fur. Back at the sacred place of the monster, something fell at an unreal speed, exploding on the ground near the lake where Fenrir resided. Surprised, the wolf looked toward the explosion to see what had happened. I'm not sure how he did that. He's blind. Inori appeared before the giant tree and greeted the wolf, saying it had been a day since their last encounter. Furious, the wolf didn't waste any time and attacked the protagonist, calling him shameless for daring to step foot in that place again. The boy commented that his eyes were very impressive, but what the heck was he talking about? The wolf didn't have eyes anymore. Charging forward, the wolf slashed with his claw, yelling for him to shut up. Probably offended by the joke too. Dodging, the protagonist thought that even blind, the wolf still had incredible precision. Fenrir said the protagonist had invaded that place twice, and now he would never let the MC leave alive. It was clear to the protagonist that the monster's rage far surpassed the pain of losing his eyes. That bastard was persistent too. Determined, the boy stopped running and prepared to do something to achieve what he wanted. Using his mystic eye, he figured he might enjoy this so much that he could end up eliminating the wolf because of it. Fenrir charged forward at full speed, just as determined to eliminate the protagonist once and for all. Using his dark magic, he began a shadow summoning spell. Several shadow wolves began to appear near Inori and charged ahead. Before Fenrir could react, the protagonist's subordinates were already attacking him with full force. Biting, tearing, and striking the wolf in various places, Fenrir wondered what the hell was happening to him at that moment. Inori said that he could still sense everything by smell, even if he couldn't see. The boy explained that those wolves used to be from his species. Realizing what the protagonist meant filled the wolf with such rage that he screamed at the MC, demanding to know what he had done to his kin. Arrogantly, the MC replied that he had turned the wolves into his servants, since they seemed quite useful to him. With a swift blow, the wolf managed to hurl several of the smaller wolves far away. Inori hadn't anticipated this and was startled to see that Fenrir was even angrier at him. The attack landed squarely on a tree behind the boy. He had dodged just in time, once again. He knew that doing that to the monster wouldn't be enough to stop him, but at least he had bought more time to complete his plan. With his claw, the wolf managed to strike Inori's side, causing him a great deal of pain. The boy is still able to use his arms to try to reduce the damage, but he was being pushed back by Fenrir in the process. The shadow wolves chase after the two. Inori is sitting on the ground, at the roots of a tree. He had been hit, but didn't seem to have suffered serious injuries. Fenrir was so enraged that his silhouette was completely black, calling the MC an enemy of his kind. Quickly, the boy uses his teleportation magic. Smiling, he vanishes, while Fenrir's strike once again hits only the tree behind him, shattering it with the force of the blow. With several pieces of wood in his mouth, the wolf knows the boy escaped once again, but he also knows he hasn't gone far. Sensing the boy's presence once more, he looks upward, precisely where the boy appeared with the teleportation magic circle. Digging his paw into the ground for momentum, Fenrir prepares his next attack. With a powerful leap, he approaches the boy with his incredible speed. Inori had stopped playing around and says the wolf misunderstood his teleportation magic. He wasn't escaping. Several threads appear around the wolf. In the next instant, something like a barrier made from Gleipnir's threads surrounds Fenrir, and he can't break through them. This leaves the wolf extremely frustrated. The thought that he couldn't detect these threads with his sense of smell is infuriating. From the forest floor, the wolf lifts his head and asks Inori what that bastard did. The boy explains that this was a line made from the wolf's own fur, and says he won't be able to escape it. With a hand-closing motion, Inori prepares his final blow. The threads begin to rapidly and dangerously close in on Fenrir. In a single moment, he is completely bound by the threads, pinned to the ground in a very humiliating position. He begins to scream in rage and tries to cut the threads, but they were made from something that couldn't be severed. Inori approaches him and says the reason he couldn't smell the trap was because it was made from his own fur and carried his scent. He explains that constantly taking Fenrir's attacks and provoking him throughout the fight was what distracted him from the trap. At the moment he used his teleportation and placed him inside the trap, there was no way out. Fenrir, tied up, falls silent before the boy. He seemed resolute about his final fate. Inori raises his hand and says, "Goodbye, Fenrir." With a movement of his hands, he tightens the cords he was holding. From a distance, the shadow wolves observe the scene. Fenrir then wonders if this is how his life will end, and the pact, it would also be undone with his death. The moon shone brightly at that moment. Now we see half of the protagonist's face. His mouth was stained, and you know exactly what that stain is. Looking at his system screen, he notices he leveled up 5 times after eating the wolf, and even gained some skills during the battle. Something written in the system window catches his attention. A unique skin appears, called King's Vessel. The MC tries to understand what this ability is until someone interrupts his thoughts by calling him. Startled, he sees that the servant wolves he had created could speak. even they were surprised by this new ability. Looking at the system again, he theorizes it's due to the new skill he received, which also seemed to apply to the servants. Inori asks why the wolf called him. He then asks if the boy couldn't turn Fenrir, their former master, into a subordinate like them. Their former master had fought desperately to protect those lands and everyone who lived there. That's why he wanted the monster to be turned into an ally for them. Inori agrees with the idea and says he'll do it, and the wolves thank him. In his thoughts, Inori realizes there's no downside for him. It's certainly a good idea to make Fenrir a vassal. Looking around, he notes that he's feeling quite tired. Back at the castle, we see a dinner taking place. The three heroes are talking among themselves, and Ryu says he's been thinking about something for a while. The first and second princesses don't seem to get along. Tamaki comments that it's not quite like that. The second princess just seems very reserved. Aoi watches their conversation without saying anything, while Ryu disagrees with Tamaki's theory. While the three continue talking, Inori is having a hard time because the food there had way too much garlic. Interrupting his thoughts, Inori hears Ryudo saying that he hoped the boy would help them with something. The protagonist then asks why his name was being mentioned at that moment. He would rather that Tamaki or Aoi do whatever needed to be done, since both of them were girls. Ryu says that they weren't close to the second princess like he was, since he was taking lessons with her, so he could fix the relationship between the princesses. Inori protests, saying that the first princess despises him and avoids him, but Ryu says there's no need to worry about that because she still complies with what he asks. The protagonist scoffs in disbelief, while Ryu smiles and says there's a reason for that. Confidently, he says the first princess was completely interested in him. The two girls become embarrassed, and Inori wonders if the boy had always been this confident. His reputation was going down the drain because of it. Ryudo says that, as a reward, he'll ask the first princess to give the MC one extra day off if he manages to fix the relationship between the two, and he agrees. Even though he had accepted it without hesitation, he had no plan for how to do what Ryu asked, so he went to the first princess's room. Looking embarrassed, the first princess tells him to come in, as she already knew the MC would come to her. Ryu had warned her in advance. Inori was already regretting being there, as she was acting superior to him, which annoyed him. Amanda says she'll allow him to speak with her, and that he should feel grateful for the opportunity. Looking around, Inori notices that the first princess's room was quite luxurious, even though the interior design lacked consistency. Pleased with herself, Amanda asks if the MC is fascinated by the room's beauty, and answers her own question, saying it's likely he had never seen anything like it in his life. The boy approaches a vase that looked very expensive, points at it, and asks if everything there was to the princess's taste. Shrugging, she answers no. Those were gifts from her mother and other countries, since royalty doesn't usually buy things for themselves. She calls him ignorant because of that, but he changes the subject, wanting to talk about the second princess, believing he could fix their relationship. Playing with her hair, Amanda doesn't seem particularly interested in discussing that kind of topic with Inori. The boy notices she's dodging the conversation and realizes things aren't going as he expected. Amanda says he doesn't need to worry about someone like the second princess. Irritated, the MC says he was asked to fix the relationship between the two of them. Grabbing her hair as if embarrassed, she says she doesn't particularly want to fix that. In disbelief, Inori repeats her words, but in the form of a question. With her back turned to him, she says that's none of his business, calling him a commoner. The boy becomes even more irritated, realizing the conversation was going nowhere, so he decides to try the other method he had in mind. Inori then says he came there because of Ryudo, since he heard that the relationship between the two was important for everyone's sake, but apparently there was nothing to be done. If Ryudo found out that the first princess didn't want to talk, then he'd be upset for creating that opportunity. At that moment, the girl becomes startled. Hastily, she asks the MC to wait, saying she was about to share the story. He was too impatient, and he realizes it worked. Brushing her hair absent-mindedly, Amanda explains that things between the two of them hadn't always been that way. Inori was slumped in a chair, as if too lazy to even listen to that boring story. When they were young, they got along very well. The second princess liked taking care of her when they were little. She was smart and was always playing with the first princess. Amanda loved following Aaliyah wherever she went, as she enjoyed her company. Unfortunately, at a certain point, she started drifting away from the first princess. When she finally turned 7, she officially became the first princess and gained the right to the throne. And after that, she discovered that Aaliyah was not her mother's daughter, the queen, as she had previously thought. All of that placed her in a very isolated position, far from Aaliyah, as if she were on a pedestal high above her. It was from that moment on that their relationship became as distant as it is today. After being officially crowned as the first princess, she entered a routine of succession training to become the next queen. With that, she understood that the second princess, who was still her sister, was truly an exceptional and kind person. Amanda constantly thought about how nice it would have been if Aaliyah had stayed by her side, even after everything that had happened. Unfortunately, the adults who were with them wouldn't allow such closeness, which created a huge rift between the two. And that was all she had to say about the two of them. Inori hadn't expected to hear about the true feelings of the first princess. That arrogant attitude of hers was merely a product of adult influence. The inconsistency in the decoration of that room reflected it clearly. There was nothing truly hers in that place. Everything in that room, including the furniture, had been provided by others. She basically had no identity of her own. Relying on her status and acting as if she were superior was the only way she knew to assert her sense of identity. Ashamed, she hides her face with her arm and tells him to say something. Since she had already told him everything, he should at least give her some advice. Inori realizes that the princess's pride was merely part of her nature. The girl had no real personality of her own, and that's pretty sad to see in someone so young. As advice, the MC tells her to say to Aaliyah that from now on she'll call her sister. But would that really be proper for a princess? The girl was very proud. How could she say something like that to her? Besides, what would the maids and the people around her think of it? The protagonist provocatively asks whether maids outrank princesses in this nation. Shouldn't the only person deciding how a princess acts be the princess herself? Grabbing his arm, Amanda says saying something like that might end up causing trouble for Aaliyah. Inori replies that the second princess wasn't as weak as she thought, and that catches the first princess's attention. Looking down, she begins to think about the boy's advice. Stammering, she says it's fine. She'll take what he said into consideration and adds that she's grateful for what he did for her. Sighing, the MC simply agrees with all of it, as it was clear there was nothing more to say. The scene changes, and we see Nala's face. She was standing before the protagonist. He had just summarized the whole story for her. Upon hearing it all, she says she understands, and even if she isn't exactly thrilled about it, she'll pass along his message. Inori notices her reaction is rather flat, but it was natural. She was the second princess's maid and may have learned to be like her. The next day, Nala returns to Inori's room, this time with a bright, joyful face, and announces that she has a message from the second princess. Inori greets her and asks what the message is. Nala says that today's lesson will be special, as it will be different from the usual. The MC hears this and immediately feels a bad premonition about what's going to happen in this lesson, ending the chapter. With a new day comes a new chapter. The city is bustling with people, and the second princess urges the MC to hurry and accompany her. Clearly exhausted from the previous night's battle, he asks why on earth they're having class in a place like that. The sun was draining his energy. Aaliyah says getting used to the city, the people, and the atmosphere is essential for understanding social studies, and that's why he has to go shopping with her. Inori asks what she was planning to buy. The girl doesn't answer, but enters a shop with beautiful accessories and asks if she shouldn't take a look at them. While observing the accessories, the girl thinks about how the first princess never buys anything for herself and tries to decide which one to get for her. Inori just watches. She was quite indecisive about what gift to get for her sister. Calling for the protagonist, she points to one of the accessories and asks which one he thinks looks prettier. Uninterested in wasting time on that, the protagonist says both are great. Aaliyah says that the accessory isn't for her. Inori is a bit confused by that. Nala approaches the boy and whispering says they're there to buy a gift for the first princess because she had passed along his message to her. Upon hearing about the message, the second princess said that the next day they would go out to buy a present for her little sister. Finally, the protagonist understands what's going on, but asks why she's asking for his opinion. Aaliyah then says she knows he met her the day before and thought he might have a better idea of what she likes. Inori replies that you can't know everything about someone from a brief conversation, and since she seems used to receiving gifts, anything should do. Looking at him accusatorily, Aaliyah asks if that means her gift would be considered useless in Amanda's eyes. Inori avoids the question by answering that what matters is who is giving it. Anything chosen by the princess herself, who is the first princess's sister, would already be amazing for her. Nala smiles upon seeing this, and as if they were communicating telepathically, she praises him, while the boy just wants to go home and sleep as soon as possible. Blushing and happy, Aaliyah says she understands what the boy means, then starts talking to the shopkeeper to buy a gift for Amanda. Nala says that if the MC hadn't talked about the conversation with Amanda, Aaliyah wouldn't have had the idea to buy a present for the first princess. The second princess seemed very happy with the gift she had chosen and held it carefully. In Nala's opinion, it was very nice to see the second princess smiling genuinely again. Inori looks at this scene but doesn't seem interested in that kind of thing at all. Aaliyah approaches and asks what the two were talking about, which scares the maid, who tries to change the subject, saying it was nothing. The girl then decides to invite everyone out for lunch and says she'll pay. 5 days go by, and we see a new dining table filled with beautiful food, and all I had for lunch today was ramen with a fried egg. Inori was specially invited to the first princess's birthday party, but he was in a discreet spot, away from everyone's view. The meals in that place seemed quite extravagant, and the guests there were all of high social status. Aaliyah was helping the first princess get ready, and she seemed very shyly happy that her sister was taking care of her again. Once finished, she places the final accessory in her hair. Amanda stands up and, showing herself to her sister, asks if she looks pretty. Smiling, the second princess says that, as expected, it looked perfect on her. Amanda smiles, slightly moved by her sister's compliment, and thanks her in the middle of the crowded hall. Everyone there seemed very happy to be part of the occasion. The three heroes were together and smiling. Even the guests seemed pleased to see the two sisters getting along again. Amanda then says there's one more gift she'd like to receive. With her head down and avoiding eye contact, she begins to gather the courage to say what she wants. She wants to call Aaliyah her older sister. This catches the second princess by surprise. Amanda asks if that wouldn't be acceptable to Aaliyah. Her sister stares at the first princess for a moment. Childhood memories start flooding her mind, and she realizes how happy the two of them were when they didn't have to worry about succession. Emotionally moved, Aaliyah replies that she's very happy about it and wants to be Amanda's older sister. The first princess is also a little surprised. Her feet take a step forward, hugging each other. The first princess finally calls Aaliyah her sister again, with deep emotion. The two remain in that embrace for a long time. Inori watches the scene, expressionless but satisfied to see the situation resolved, until something catches his attention. Both the king and queen were crying at the scene. He actually thought they'd be furious, but fortunately, they were happy. Ryuto approaches the MC and says it was a great idea to leave that task in his hand. Inori says he did all the hard work himself, so Ryuto had better fulfill his part and give him the reward he deserves. The other boy laughs and says he'll think about it, but thanks him again. He doesn't need to think, he just needs to do what he promised. Aliyah had always seemed like a troubled person in Ryudo's eyes, but he also says he's glad to see the two sisters reconciled. He truly was pleased to see that scene. Glancing sideways at the boy, Inori thinks he really is a very good person, the kind of behavior one would expect from a hero. The MC then decides to step away. Noticing this, Ryudo asks where he's going, but he just says he's going to get some fresh air. He stands outside the castle, watching the sun set. Aliyah begins to approach him quietly and calls his name. Smiling, she thanks the boy once again and says she's there to talk to him. Turning to her, Inori says she can say whatever she wants. There's no one around to spy on them. Laughing, she says his detection blessing is really useful, then stands by his side. Inori tells her that this time it's better if she expresses her emotions, and she complains, saying he's the last person who should say something like that to her. Suddenly, a bloodstain appears on the ballroom floor, where the two of them no longer were. Someone was holding a sword there. The guests are shocked to witness the scene. Unaware of what had happened, the MC thinks that from now on she will no longer be known as the doll princess. A terrifying scream is heard throughout the castle, immediately drawing the attention of both of them. Aliyah looks back, frightened, and the chapter ends. The chapter begins with the two of them running back to the hall to see what had happened. Before she can enter, Inori stops her. Aliyah watches from afar what has occurred. The head of a blonde woman lies on the floor. The screams grow more constant. The queen had been slaughtered in cold blood. The king had not been spared either, and between them stood a man. The perpetrator of the crime yells for the corrupt people in that room to shut up immediately. He screams that the queen kept spending the kingdom's resources and increasing everyone's poverty without caring about the people. In his view, the king was also an accomplice for not stopping her from committing such atrocities, and now neither of them are there anymore. Vidare, the name of the rebel who killed the king and queen, says he will take the throne since he has royal blood. Someone approaches, wearing high heels. Hijiana, who was there, appears, and the man says she will be the new queen of the kingdom. Inori watches that in disgust. The commander of the knights was involved in this. Aliyah is in shock at it all. Amanda, kneeling on the floor before her mother's head, begins sobbing uncontrollably. Hatred consumes her body, and her magical aura becomes unstable. She screams, calling Vidare insane. Casting a spell, she prepares to attack and charges toward the rebel. In her hand was a pink Rasengan, and she ran toward Vidare to eliminate him once and for all. Hijiana stepped in between them, and with a swift motion made several slashes with her sword. Before she could dodge, Amanda had already been struck, and her arm was no longer there. Falling to the ground, the girl screamed in pain and curled up to stop the bleeding. Her accessory, which had been a gift from her sister, landed far away from her. Ryudo shouted and prepared an attack to try to stop Hijiana, while Tamaki and Aoi were frozen in shock. Before the boy could move, Hijiana ordered him to stay where he was. If he attacked her now, he wouldn't get a quick death. Hijiana's sword was positioned right at Amanda's neck. Vidare shouted that they were scum and servants of the witch. Aliyah wanted to run toward them, but was held back by the MC while the man screamed that everyone there had betrayed the witch's will by summoning the heroes to their world. That was a grave sin that could only be forgiven through death. Amanda wept uncontrollably at those words. Hijiana's sword came down without hesitation, straight at the first princess's neck. As Amanda's head fell, someone screamed for her to return to the witch's side through death. Aliyah was horrified and seemed about to scream, and Inori looked at her, desperate to stop her. The second princess shouted her younger sister's name, but before she could further reveal her position, the MC silenced her. With his hand over her mouth, he told her that if she made another sound, she would be discovered. This was a rebellion. They couldn't act without thinking. This was practically a grand event for such an occasion. Vidare yelled to the citizens to send the fools gathered there to the witch's side and punish them. The party guests began to panic. Gathered there, the kingdom's cavalry began to massacre everyone in the banquet hall indiscriminately. Men, women, the young and the old were being eliminated without mercy. While hearing the screams of the nobles, Vidare declared that corruption, discrimination, and waste, all of it would fall along with those corrupt elites and the royal family. Shouting, the man said that they all deserved to die, and that's why they were being punished. Aliyah tried to break free from the protagonist, but he held her, asking her to stay calm. If she moved now, she would die too. Tears began to fall down her face amid her despair. Inori told her she had two choices: die shamefully there or escape and survive. While all the guests were still being killed at the party, Ryuto knelt beside Amanda's lifeless body. He began yelling for Vidare to stop being ridiculous. His scream of hatred said that there was no such thing as a person who deserved to die. In a way, I disagree with him, but that's another topic. Vidare said the hero was still very young. He didn't understand what was really going on. All the nobles present were nothing but scum who didn't deserve the lives they had. He had no idea what the true situation of the land of the rising sun was. Furious, the boy shouted that even if that were true, they didn't need to be slaughtered. The man stared at Ryudo for a brief moment and replied that soon he would gradually understand the state of the country and the horrors it faced. He then ordered Aijana to arrest the heroes. Summoning her aura, the commander warned him to stop his futile resistance if he didn't want to face a hard time. The boy didn't even hesitate. Hatred had already completely consumed him. Activating his limit break skill, he raised his arms, preparing his magic. A sword of light appeared in his hands, and he used it in a direct strike at the commander of the royal cavalry. But he noticed something unusual. The woman effortlessly blocked his attack completely and was left unharmed. She praised him, saying it was a decent strike. His judgment and power weren't bad. Before she could finish her sentence, the boy was already defending against her counterattack, which struck his sword. He stood no chance against that swordswoman. While he struggled to land attacks, Aegeana defended without even breaking a sweat. Even so, Ryudo wasn't entirely weak and managed to cause some damage to the area where they were fighting. Several slashes hit the floor and pillars of the hall. Aoi appeared. She was fighting too. Creating a shield, she managed to block the attacks from the rebel soldiers who were trying to capture them. Tamaki said the two of them needed to rescue Ryudo quickly, but Aoi replied there were too many soldiers for just the two of them to handle right now. Aegeana was near them, but her attention was still on the boy. He was tired and out of breath, but he hadn't given up yet. Advancing toward her, he tries to strike, but Aegeana dodges and says the girls are also having trouble and won't win that battle. The commander's sword comes down directly toward Ryudo's face, but he manages to block it at the last moment, even if it costs him all his strength. Aegeana asks what he's going to do. Even if he keeps fighting with all his might, he won't be able to defeat her. It was time to give up, says the commander, her face calm. Once she finished capturing everyone there, she would still have to deal with the second princess. Aliyah was crying, kneeling on the ground after everything that had happened. Inori watches her but takes no action. He apologizes for breaking the mood, but says if she stays there, she won't survive, so she needs to decide whether she'll stay or escape. Aliyah clutches her robe tightly as tears fall uncontrollably from her face onto her dress. The MC then asks if she's going to give up again now. Those words hit Aliyah hard, and she finally snaps out of the trance of grief she was in. Standing up quickly, she says she won't give up and will survive for Amanda's sake too. Still crying, she turns to Inori and says she won't give anyone the right to decide her death. Inori looks at her and with a smug smile, says he'll help her escape. Finally, after 24 chapters, he stops calling her second princess and calls her by her name, Aliyah. The girl finally stopped crying in that moment. We return to the fight between Ryudo and Aegeana, which was still going very badly for the boy. Finally, his sword of light shatters after a strike from the commander. He's shocked to see it happen and tries to back away from her. Unfortunately, it's too late. Aegeana says everything is going to end now. She lifts her leg toward the boy, and her kick lands on his stomach with such force that it sends him flying. The blow was so strong that Ryudo faints. Tamaki turns to see what happened and screams for the boy, who is now lying on the ground, unconscious. Worried, she begins thinking about her options, because if she doesn't do something, everything will get even worse and all three of them could be wiped out for good. The moment she decides to save Ryudo, Aegeana leaps toward where the two girls are and, with a single sword strike, destroys Aoi's shield. The two are shocked to see that happen and can't react immediately. Aegeana gives the order to capture the two girls now that their shield is gone. The soldiers charge toward them, and I'm wondering if the MC isn't going to do anything. Just let everyone get screwed. Tamaki and Aoi are thrown to the ground and captured. Tamaki screams at them, but the soldiers would never listen to her. They weren't her subordinates. Finally, Aegeana orders them to take all three to prison. But with magic, won't they be able to escape easily? Aegeana watches and wonders if she spent too much time helping Ryudo. That line confused me a little. What do you mean helping? She nearly killed him. The scene shifts, and we see Aliyah running. Starting to run as well. Inori is guiding the second princess, thinking that his presence there wouldn't make a difference. Everyone else would lose. What mattered at that moment was saving Aliyah, because she would never be able to escape that situation on her own. He says they shouldn't take the right corridor. They need to go left instead. Aliyah immediately understands and follows him without question. Quickly, the two manage to pass by two unsuspecting guards who don't see them. She knew he was using his detection ability to avoid unnecessary confrontations. It was as if he had been waiting for this. Starting to get tired, Inori asks Aliyah if she can use magic, and she replies that she only knows the basic. He places her in front of him, and she asks what's going on. In between gasps for breath, he warns that in 10 seconds, 3 soldiers will appear ahead of them. Inori wanted her to do something about them. The boy was breathless and exhausted from the running, because it was daytime. Desperate, Aliyah screams, asking if they can't just avoid them, but the MC says they can't dodge every encounter. That wasn't an option. Swallowing hard, the girl understands what he means and begins to gather the courage to act. Forming a green racing gang, she asks him if it's really just 3. In 3 seconds they'll appear, Inori warns. The soldiers were already rounding the hallway corner, and then Aliyah casts a spell called Air Hole. 3 projectiles shoot forward at full speed. She quickly hits all their heads, but it isn't a damage spell. It looks more like a vacuum helmet to make them faint due to lack of air. The 3 soldiers fall to the ground almost immediately, unconscious, and that leaves Inori quite surprised by the second princess's abilities. Looking at the result of the spell, he says that's what you'd expect from someone of the elite, taking down 3 soldiers with a single spell. Aliyah says they only managed to escape thanks to her starting the incantation before the soldiers appeared, and she's glad it worked. She notices the MC's fatigue and asks if he's okay. The boy admits that he's really exhausted, but they can't stop, since the soldiers won't wait for them to recover. Running again, he tells her that they'll soon reach a less guarded area, where they'll be able to rest for a bit. Analyzing the situation, Inori concludes that even if a few soldiers show up, they can easily handle that kind of situation. The problem was that it would be practically impossible for Aliyah to deal with Aegeana, and at that moment he was too weak to fight properly. His primary objective was to make sure they would never be found by her, otherwise it would be game over. Every precaution was necessary. After all, those people were on a whole other level. Finally, the MC reaches another corner of the castle. Catching his breath, he decides to take a look at what's ahead. Using his detection skill, he tells Aliyah that it doesn't seem like anyone is nearby, so he wants to check if there's an escape route through there. Looking at the place, Aaliyah says that's the servants' quarters. Through the crack in the door, it's already clear there are no living people left inside. Covering her mouth, Aaliyah looks into the room, shock taking over her body, while Inori remains impassive in his reactions. With the door open, the scene is simply devastating. All the servants there were no longer alive. A massacre had occurred. The protagonist then understands why there were no guards in that area. It was no longer necessary. Even the servants had been wiped out. Entering the room, Aaliyah calls out Nala's name. She finds her most loyal servant lying on the ground like a sack of trash. Her eyes were completely lifeless, and dried blood stained her mouth as she lay in a pool of her own blood. Lifting the servant in her arms, Aaliyah embraces her and begins a silent cry as Inori watches. The memory of the servant saying she was happy to see Aaliyah smiling once again returns to her mind, and that's painfully hard to watch, wouldn't you agree? Seeing this whole scene, I expect nothing less than a brutal revenge, and that all those bastards pay dearly for this. Placing Nala's body gently back on the floor with as much care as possible, Aaliyah mourns her loss for a moment longer. Looking back at the MC, she thanks him for waiting for her and says she's fine now. Inori pretends disinterest and says he was just taking a break so they could get going. Curious, she asks him how they're supposed to escape, and the scene shifts. We are now in the prison where the heroes were held. None of them dared to say a single word, no matter how shocked or scared they were. Egiana was preparing the sealing magic and explained that that prison was one of the most impenetrable in the kingdom, made only for the worst criminals. Without magical artifacts, it was impossible to break the seal, so they'd best remain quiet. Tamaki asked if they could at least have their restraints removed, since escaping that place was impossible. Ryudo told the girl not to bother. The Heroes Alliance would come after them to rescue them because of the coup that had been staged against them. The boy knew they couldn't be eliminated yet, since that would be a problem for the revolution, so they were buying time by imprisoning them. Egiana said he was spot on in his analysis and praised him, saying that for someone under great tension, his mind was clear as water. The boy was emanating a strange energy, completely different from the one he usually used. His hatred was growing by the second as he stared at the commander without hesitation. The two girls were frightened by this. Maybe they had never seen him so furious before. Egiana looked into Ryudo's eyes and thought she recognized their color. She had seen that look before, in her past, in the middle of a massacre where only she had remained standing. The rain falling over the bodies had transformed that gaze, the gaze of someone who had to bury both their happiness and their naive lack of resolve. Egiana recognizes that she once had the same look in her eyes that Ryudo had at that moment. This seems to affect her feelings slightly, as she looks away with a sad expression, but Ryudo still shows his hatred toward her. Leaving the prison, she says that he was still very young. If he wanted to survive in that world, he'd better not forget those feelings and judgments. If she had been able to control them in her time, she might have at least saved the lives of the other two girls. Egiana finally leaves the dungeons. Aoi and Tamaki were sad about being powerless in that situation. Ryudo's hatred kept growing, along with his regret, and he wonders why he was acting like some sort of mentor. As she climbed the stairs, Egiana's thoughts turned to the MC and Aaliyah. They still hadn't been found. It was clear they had done an excellent job escaping what she had anticipated. Determined, she informs the soldiers that she will gear up to begin the search for the second princess, and the soldiers comply with her order. The two were still in the maid's quarters, and Aaliyah was looking at a map, pointing out the best escape route from the castle. She points to a spot in the corner of the map, and Inori asks what's there, to which the girl replies about a secret door that leads to the kingdom's sewers. If they can get there, they'll be able to fully escape to the outside of the castle, making it harder for them to be intercepted. Inori says it's worth a try, but asks if it's a route known only to the royal family. She says yes, it's an emergency exit meant only for royal family members, but she also says she's not sure if it's still usable. It's not like they had other choices. The best option was to go there and see if they could use that escape route. Looking around, all Aaliyah can think about is how sad she feels for not being strong enough to stop any of this. Nala was still there, lying on the ground with her eyes closed forever, but at least she looked like she was simply sleeping. Leaving the room, she mentally thanks them for everything they did for her, leaving behind everything that tied her to her past. The soldiers' footsteps echo through the hallways as they continue searching for Inori and Aaliyah. Using his detection ability once again, the MC manages to avoid most of them. His thought was that they needed to test that escape route and hope it was still functional. He wasn't sure if only the royal family knew about that place, but in the worst case scenario, he used his detection to avoid any confrontations. Running through the corridors, they continue talking in whispers. Aaliyah truly wasn't sure if that place was still a viable escape route, but he repeats that they don't have another option. He apologizes for not being able to do anything other than run away with her, and she thanks him for everything he's done so far. Inori grabs her arm, and she looks back to see what it is, as he tells her there's an ambush ahead. There were no fewer than 20 people there. It would be impossible for the two of them to get through in a fight. Additionally, there were still soldiers approaching from behind, so retreating was also impossible. The footsteps of the soldiers were getting closer to where they were with every second. Aaliyah asks if there's no other way for them to get past without being noticed. Inori says it's impossible, and I think to myself, is his shadow magic really that useless during the day? Does it just not work, or is the MC just dumb? It was clear that the soldiers were already aware of that escape route, and now the place was completely surrounded by enemies. Aaliyah was visibly frustrated and clenched her jaw in frustration. The boy then says those soldiers would kill without hesitation, and asks if they already knew about that route or if they tortured someone to get that information. A thought about leaving her behind crosses the MC's mind. After all, It would be much easier to escape if it were just him, but with her, everything becomes harder. She once again says she will not give up. Shouting, she looks at the MC and says she will not stand still waiting for her death. She will fight to the end. She could have whispered that instead of shouting, but okay. Inori observes her determined behavior and truly feels moved by it. Smiling, he thinks that her spirit wasn't broken yet, so she was someone he could still trust. Inori says he used detection and found out that a neighboring army seemed to be heading toward the castle. That surprises the girl, and he says it was likely an army. He couldn't tell who had sent them, but he knew they weren't soldiers from this nation. Aaliyah asks how long it would take them to reach the castle. His answer is simple: around sunset, and we see that this is happening at that very moment. In about 15 minutes, if they can withstand anything, they have a chance to survive, but they won't be able to avoid combat. Determined, Aaliyah says she understands. Inori simply wonders if they'll survive until sunset. It was a 50-50th gamble. Taking the lead, Inori says they'll deal with the soldiers up ahead since there are fewer of them, and she should watch the rear. She agrees, and the two start running. At that moment, one of the soldiers notices their movement. He shouts that the second princess has been found, alerting everyone nearby to gather and capture her. One of the soldiers orders the magical arrows to be fired at them, and several archers appear with their bows drawn. 3 arrows are launched in the direction of the protagonist and Aaliyah. Seeing the arrows approaching, she begins to form a magic barrier, and at the last moment, they are protected. But they keep running. Shouting, she tells Inori they only need to survive for 15 minutes, so they have to do whatever it takes to reach that goal. More arrows are fired, and this time, Aaliyah doesn't have time to create a barrier. They graze them, tearing their clothes and skin. Inori yells to turn right and avoid further shots. She still uses the barrier to help them change direction, but many arrows still pass by, luckily missing their targets. A soldier yells not to let them escape. It was time to completely surround them. Using detection, Inori realizes they were moving faster than he expected. There were soldiers coming from the left passage. He gives the warning and asks if there's any way to block their advance. Understanding the command, Aaliyah begins preparing a spell to prevent them from being surrounded. A magical barrier appears at the corridor entrance, stopping them from passing through. One of the soldiers is startled and asks what the hell that was, but another one tells them to force their way through it no matter what. The barrier is broken through physical force, and I wonder what kind of weak magic that is, if a regular soldier can destroy it. They keep running. The point of the passage wasn't to trap them forever, but to prevent them from being surrounded, and it served its purpose. Aaliyah runs behind the MC, but she's starting to get tired. Looking through the bars of one of the windows, Aaliyah thinks there's still time left before sunset, and they seem to be in a dead end. The girl gets scared and nervous, feeling completely cornered. Inori explains that this was the only place left for them to go since there were soldiers at every other possible exit. There were still 3 minutes left until sunset. They had to hold on for that long, but they had already been found in that location. The order to fire magical arrows is given and followed immediately. Throwing herself on the protagonist, Aaliyah creates a new barrier and places him behind her to protect him. Someone asks if they should engage them physically, but the commander refuses, saying many of them had already been defeated that way. Better to use arrows. The attacks continue relentlessly. More enemies are approaching, and Aaliyah realizes her magical power is almost depleted. If this absurd number of shots keeps coming, she won't be able to withstand all of them. She must at least block the fatal ones. More arrows are fired, this time in a quantity far greater than Aaliyah could defend against, and her barrier is smaller than before. An explosion occurs from the impact of the magical arrows. The commander orders the archers to prepare the next barrage. They won't stop until the two are completely eliminated. Her barrier finally breaks. Aaliyah uses a magic circle on a wound on her arm to stop the bleeding. Unfortunately, she was already too exhausted to continue. The next barrage would be the last. Aaliyah wouldn't give up easily. Still using her shield one more time, she manages to block more fatal shots from the soldiers. Now exhausted, the girl looks at the MC and asks if help would really arrive by the end of the day. The captain sees there's no counterattack, so it's the perfect opportunity to strike, but something catches his attention. Only the girl was there, lying down and injured. The other boy had vanished completely. Aaliyah, lying on the ground, searches for the MC, and with tears in her eyes, wonders where he had gone. The ground where the MC stood seemed to have a dark puddle, and she tries to call out to Inori, but gets no response. Screaming, she asks where Inori is and starts searching around for him. Desperate, she wonders if he had used her as bait to escape and left her behind, but she feels conflicted thinking about how he had promised to help her. Was the story about reinforcements just something to make her fight until the end and buy him time to run? Was it all a lie? The girl's mind is in turmoil, and the soldiers take advantage of this moment to finally eliminate her, advancing under the commander's orders. Looking up, we see that she was already at her limit and wouldn't be able to defend herself. The sun had finally disappeared behind the hills, and now night had fallen. It was time for the reinforcements to arrive and save them. A twisted smile stretches across his face as Inori appears, apologizing to Aaliyah for keeping her waiting. A dark and terrifying aura manifests before the girl, who was on the ground, nearly unconscious. Inori was there, and now it was his turn to attack. Frightened, the soldier who had been commanding the others realizes that the area has gone completely dark. Things were about to get really ugly. Turning to his companions, he yells that he can't see and orders someone to light a torch and illuminate the area. A shadow of a giant wolf appears over all the soldiers, and they are stunned and terrified by the darkness surrounding them. Inori then asks his loyal servant Fenrir to take care of those soldiers for him. Obeying the command, the beast begins to act before the soldiers can even realize that their end had come. The scene is not pretty, and you two wouldn't let me show it to you, but I can guarantee that none of those men are leaving there alive. The captain yells for them to attack the beast that was finishing off all the soldiers, but no one had the ability to strike a shadow. Confused, he asks why the soldiers are screaming and demands a report on the situation, but no one there would respond to his command. A hand appears in the still very dark hallway. The captain looks at that hand, not understanding what is happening. Even Aaliyah is completely confused by the situation, and the soldier yells, asking for the lieutenant and ordering a head count immediately. Inori watches the scene with a wicked smile, and Aaliyah is on the verge of passing out. Yelling, the captain demands a response while the MC approaches from behind, saying that no one is going to answer him no matter how much he shouts. Turning around in fear, the soldier screams at the MC, asking where he came from. Just a few seconds ago, he hadn't been with the second princess. Looking up, Inori asks Fenrir if he's already finished his task. Appearing behind the soldier, the wolf says that only that one was left and comments that all the men there were far too weak, scaring the soldier even more. Inori simply replies to Fenrir that, compared to him, calling them weak was merely stating a fact. Screaming in desperation, the soldier falls to the floor and tries to crawl toward the nearest wall, as if that could somehow save him. Not understanding what Fenrir is, he calls for help, but there was no one left to hear his fear. Inori asks if he hadn't eliminated a large number of people earlier. It would only be fair that he be eliminated in return for all the lives he had taken in the ballroom. Trembling in fear, the soldier loses his strength, and also his voice. The moon outside the castle turns crimson as the soldier gathers enough strength to ask one final question. Are you really Takafuji Inori? Looking at him without mercy, the MC responds with another question. Who's to say? Right after that, Fenrir's jaws opened to seal the fate of that rebel. Not even his blood was left to tell the tale. Only a strange hole in the clean wall and Aaliyah lying on the ground, badly wounded. Still conscious, she calls out to him. Inori notices she's using the last remnants of her magic to stop her bleeding. He says that was a good choice, but she had already lost too much blood. Now it was too late. She wouldn't survive. And that cold line from him made me really angry. If I could, I'd punch the protagonist. With a disappointed look, she asks if he had those powers from the beginning. Inori tells her not to look at him like that. It wasn't his fault. That power of his could only be accessed at the end of the day. That was precisely why he had to endure everything until that moment. The conversation about reinforcements had that purpose. If it were just about his own survival, he wouldn't need this, but at least he had a bit of hope. She then begins to moan in pain. Watching the girl, he remembers her determination. Her eyes were those of someone who had not yet given up on life, full of conviction. Seeing this, he realizes that if that's the case, he wants to test her to see what happens. He says he'll be direct, since they're short on time. Inori asks the girl if she was a virgin, and she asks how he knows that. I don't know about you, but to me it seems pretty obvious that she is. The boy doesn't answer her, but says that if that's the case, there's a way she can survive. But there's a condition. For that to happen, she would have to become his servant. She had two options: accept her death as a human, or embrace life as something else, something no longer human. The choice was hers. Already weak from blood loss, her words no longer make sense. She speaks about humans and protection, but can't finish the sentence. Aaliyah says she wants something, but her words trail off, and her mind drifts to thoughts of her sister and her maids. Gathering her last strength, she finally says that it doesn't matter what she has to do. Even if she has to sell her soul to a demon, she wants to live. Inori, as impassive as ever, watches the girl's determination surface once again. With a twisted, mocking smile, he says she gave a good answer. Lifting her in his arms, he exposes her neck to begin the transformation ritual. Before biting her neck, he says that just like she said, he is indeed far more like a demon than a god, and then begins. The girl's eyes begin to lose their shine as he drinks her blood. Did you know that biting someone's neck is a metaphor for The vampiric venom starts to infect Aaliyah's blood, her entire body beginning to transform without her realizing it. At last, the ritual ends, and he dresses her in some garments so she can rest while regaining consciousness. Turning to the wolves, he commands them to turn the soldiers into zombies and take care of any others still alive. Additionally, Inori also commands them to protect the girl until she wakes up. He was going to take this moment to have a little fun around there. Back at the banquet hall, Videre was sitting on the king's throne and was being announced as the new monarch. The soldiers arrived to give their report about Aaliyah. Being informed that she had been cornered, he says the beginning of a new nation was being born and commands them not to fail their mission. Closing his eyes, he begins to recall the horrors he saw outside the castle, the hunger and disease taking over the people, the abandoned orphans. It was all the same because he also felt equally guilty for doing nothing to change it. It's clear that despite being a villain, he's being romanticized in this story because he has a journey to follow and a past to which he clings in order to maintain his ideals. All Videre wanted was to return his nation to the proper way it should be ruled. Before he could continue with his dream, a blade appears beside him from within the MC's shadows. His eyes widen the moment it slices across his neck, making him realize he had already lost. The boy was there. The soldiers notice Inori's presence and are stunned. A strange sensation runs through Igiana's body, but she can't say what it was. Little does the commander know that her king had now been condemned for eternity. The soldiers scream in despair for a king who lasted less than a bowl of ramen. Inori lifts the head of the fallen king for everyone in the hall to see. The boy announces that this shows their plan had failed and they no longer have any reason to fight, then asks what they will do now. Enraged, they curse the protagonist, calling him a bastard, and charge at the boy to avenge their fallen king. With his mocking smile, the MC then says he likes this and summons several knives, like a dark Gilgamesh going into battle. They had come this far, eliminating each other as much as possible, so in this case, he wouldn't hesitate. Several knives strike the two soldiers present, eliminating them instantly. Inori says that if they resist, that will make him very happy, because then he could wipe out everyone without a shred of remorse. The screams from the massacre in the ballroom echo throughout the entire interior of the castle. A woman strangely resembling Aaliyah and wearing armor is running toward the ballroom, having heard the screams, and asks if anyone else heard them. Another girl with purple eyes replies that yes, it sounded like someone was screaming. The girls run at full speed toward the ballroom to see what happened. Upon arriving, the scene is shocking. Several dark magical threads are spread across the ballroom, with Inori standing in the middle of them. Looking at the girls, he says he remembers who they are. Female warriors directly under Ajiana's command, the Valkyrie Squad. The brown-haired girl furrows her brow in anger, calls out the protagonist's name, and asks if that was his doing. Without looking directly at them, he asks if they'll fight him seriously if he answers yes. One of the Valkyries looks up and sees something that leaves her completely horrified. Enraged, the red-haired girl clenches her jaw and charges at the protagonist. Taking the lead, she draws her sword and without hesitation, strikes at the MC. The blow lands directly in the boy's stomach. Wounded, Inori starts coughing up blood on the girl. She cries, filled with hatred toward the MC, but he lets out a small "oh," impressed by the Valkyrie's resolve. Inori says he must have killed someone very important to her for her to show her emotions so openly. If that's the case, then he must have done something really awful, right? As he speaks, his knives fly into the girl's back. The Valkyrie, who appears to be the leader, is shocked by the scene. It looked like a mutual kill, but that wasn't really what happened. Removing the sword still lodged in his body, Inori looks at the Valkyries, preparing for battle while simultaneously healing. Immediately, the leader orders Alice and Miranda to get ready. They had already understood that the protagonist was much stronger than he seemed, so they take the initiative to attack, as he needed to be eliminated immediately. The leader notices he still maintained his composure, even after being mortally wounded by Elf, and can't understand how he survived that. Casting an electric spell, she analyzes the MC's body in search of a vital point to aim for. Inori then activates his analysis magic on the Valkyrie. He sees that her weapon was a magical tool and seemed quite different from what regular soldiers used. While analyzing, something completely catches him by surprise. Looking down at his foot, he sees that a crust of ice had formed there, preventing him from moving. One of the Valkyries says she managed to trap him using ice magic, and the other tells her to leave it to her, then goes in for the attack. An unidentified projectile flies past the MC, and even just grazing him, explodes a chunk of his torso. That too was a magical tool. The activation speed and power of those weapons were on a whole different level, one he couldn't quite keep up with. Charging toward the protagonist, the leader lands a blow on the MC's face, causing major damage. Landing on the other side in a pose filled with aura, she believes she's defeated him. Looking back, she already assumes he surely won't be able to get up after those two hits. Inori also turns to look at the leader, but thinks that those magical tools were far more troublesome than he had anticipated. Breaking apart like a Legio figure, he leaves his leg behind and leaps forward to recover his movement. The woman is horrified to see this and screams, asking how he's still able to move after that. Even so, she calms herself and returns to analyzing the situation, looking for an opening to strike once he hits the ground, readying her stance. Before that opening appears, intense screams are heard throughout the ballroom, shocking the Valkyrie leader. Looking behind her, she sees that the two girls, Miranda and Alice, were trapped by Gleipnir's magical threads and completely immobilized. Inori says he would have loved to witness the Valkyrie's coordinated attack, but unfortunately his time is short, and he has something important to do. He says that, in that case, he prefers a one-on-one duel with the vice commander. The woman becomes very nervous at the idea. Slowly approaching her, he says the Valkyrie would be a perfect warm-up before facing their real commander. Shocked, the vice commander says he must be crazy to think he can go up against Aegiana one-on-one. With his analysis magic still active, the MC observes her. He says that among the three who are still alive there, she must be the most skilled, so fighting alone would help her unlock her full potential. Inori grows curious and asks why she prefers to fight accompanied, and the vice commander seems shocked by the MC's analysis. Clenching her jaw, she leaps forward toward the MC. The woman shouts, telling the MC to shut up while attacking. But this time he was ready and manages to redirect her strike. Attacking again, she yells once more that he knows nothing about her, so he shouldn't speak nonsense. Well, he knows she's already lost her composure. An explosion of magic erupts right beside the MC, but he dodges it and is already fully healed to fight her. Summoning one of the knives from his shadow dimension, he grabs it and uses it to block another strike from the vice captain. The built-up rage causes her mind to bring forth memories of when she was recruited to the Valkyries by Commander Aegiana. Her name was Maria, and she was being introduced by Aegiana to the other women, asking them to take good care of the newcomer. The three girls turn to see the person arriving with the commander. She doesn't remain silent, as if expecting some sort of rejection from the women present. Quickly, they gather around her and, excited by her presence, ask her to join them and begin to make friends right there. Maria starts to blush, happy to finally be accepted somewhere. Back in the present, in the middle of the battle, Maria yells at the MC, asking how he dares to insult her comrades. She won't forgive him. Delighting in the fight, Inori shouts back that Maria's fighting spirit is impressive. He tells her to keep going and give her best, and she starts being struck in several non-lethal spots. Inori is ecstatic and thinks he wants to keep fighting her longer, but if the sun rises, he's done for. Bro is the reverse Escanor. Maria makes an unexpected move and charges at the protagonist without aiming directly at him. This catches Inori off guard as she passes by his side. Quickly, the vice commander's blade is at the MC's magical threads. Raising the threads, she commands her comrades to get up and return to battle. It was time to avenge Elf. She wasn't alone. The Valkyrie squad was home to all of them, and her mind turns to her family. A scream is heard, a mouth opens, and we see that one of the Valkyries bites Maria's neck. Looks like that one wasn't a virgin anymore. Looking at her comrade, the vice commander is stunned to see that she's being devoured by her. Miranda was also biting another part of her body. They had already been completely possessed by the MC's blood. A wolf appears before Maria and explains that, unfortunately, those people had already become zombies. Even transformed, the girls still retain some memories of their comrade. Inori is behind one of them and says their fight was amazing. Already disinterested again, he says that if he were a little more greedy, he could have enjoyed the fight more, but there's nothing left to do. Leaving, he says the four of them could now do whatever they wanted as he walks away for good. Maria is in shock, watching her comrades approach her like mere zombies ready to devour her. All the Valkyrie can do in her final moments is scream in despair for losing everything she had. The three zombies then completely devour the body of their former vice commander. Inori doesn't even turn back to see the woman's end. His final objective now is singular. The scene shifts, and we see the shadow wolves devouring every soldier they come across. Fully geared, Ajiana runs through the castle corridors, searching for Inori and Aaliyah. Meanwhile, Inori is also hunting his prey with a mocking delight. Ajiana feels another bad sensation. Little does she know that everyone who stood by her in the rebellion is already in the next world, and she continues running through the castle. Arriving at the banquet hall, all we see is a room stained with blood, and we know it belonged to many people. Ajiana's gaze scans the hall, and she notices the same thing. Looking into the room, all she sees is a head lying on the floor, right in the middle of the hall. The girl couldn't recognize whose head it was. Facing away, the face couldn't be seen. The commander approaches and finally reaches out to pick up the object. Kneeling down and turning the head to identify its owner, she is left completely speechless. In that moment, she thinks to herself that her intuition tends to be quite accurate, and she sees that it was none other than Lord Vittere. Inori appears from above, flying, and comments that the moon looks very beautiful tonight. Startled, the commander turns around to see the protagonist. He says there's a phrase that was quite famous for being used in love confessions in his world. Horrified, Ajian asks if he's really Inori, as he quotes the phrase, "This head is a present for you." The commander then calmly sets Vittere's head on the ground again and calls out to the protagonist. Curious, she asks if the wings he possesses belong to a demon. He looks at his own wing, as if unsure how to answer her question. Furious, she exclaims that this was the mark of someone who sold their soul to demons in exchange for power, and yells that he threw his life away for it. Those words leave the MC quite confused. It's almost as if she hadn't also abandoned her humanity in exchange for power, just through a different path. Inori says he doesn't understand her words. All he's doing is trying to keep living, and everything he did was to survive. Enraged, she yells at him that the argument he used is far too weak. She was fighting for her nation. In this world, people needed a strong reason to live. Be it family, desire, or revenge, it didn't matter. Her hand starts to tremble. It's unclear if it's from rage or regret. Lowering her head, Ajiana says that if she had taught him properly, he wouldn't have gone down the demonic path, and she finally apologizes to Inori. Those words seem to deeply affect the boy as he places his hand over his face, as if trying to hide that he's about to cry. Landing in front of her, he says that was a very noble lecture, even though it was directed at someone who had just wiped out the mastermind behind it all. She still viewed him as nothing more than a student, but her argument had completely failed. Inori asks if she's still going to continue with the talk about the nation, but she interrupts, saying that even without Vittere, they can still continue. The protagonist raises his voice, calling out to her, and the scene that follows completely paralyzes the woman. From the walls, using shadow dimension magic, the shadow wolves begin to emerge carrying pieces of the traitorous soldiers. None of them showed the slightest sign of life, and there were many. Inori says it's no longer a matter of we. The bodies are dropped to the floor by the wolves. Some were still alive and screamed in pain, others gagged, could only groan. Ajiana looks at the scene in shock, completely unable to react anymore. The soldiers who had surrounded them, the ones who had carried out the massacre in the ballroom, even the Valkyrie squad behind all of this mess, none of them were left to stand beside Ajiana. She was the only one still alive. According to the MC, they were only neutralized, but their lives could still be spared. The price for that would be for her to sacrifice herself in exchange for everyone else's lives. Inori sits atop one of the Valkyries to provoke Ajiana. He was bored, as he believed he'd have a fight against her, but it was starting to feel more like a student-teacher debate. Not very fun for him. Thinking to himself, Inori wonders if he should make them fight each other if she surrenders, and does as he asks. Absent-mindedly, he starts petting one of his shadow wolves on the head. None of this seemed interesting to him. To me either. I'd rather see the two start beating each other up right now. Inori says he can come to an agreement with her, sparing most of the soldiers in exchange for her life and Vittere's, but she's already holding her weapon. With the sword sheath in one hand, she raises it before her. Curious, the MC asks what she's doing, but gets no reply. Instead determined, she does something different. Stabbing the sword sheath into the ground, a powerful aura begins to envelop the place where she stood. Inori feels the power radiating from Ajiana through a wind strong enough to toss his hair. She says this is a moment of silence. She dedicates this moment to her comrades who were humiliated and died in battle, but also to those comrades who are about to be eliminated, and then she begins to unsheathe the blade with a crimson edge. Ajiana then opens her eyes, ready to cut the protagonist into 1,000 pieces if necessary. As the two stare at each other, the woman says she will offer his life in place of her comrades. Unmoved, Inori continues the conversation and asks if she's really going to abandon her soldiers to fight against him. Furious, she says the Night Corps was a unit to which she had devoted her entire life training. she would never abandon them. With her own hands, she would put an end to everyone's life there. I don't get it. She won't abandon them but plans to eliminate them. Did she finally lose it? Inori is also stunned by those words but remains in position. He says that if she does this, there will be no one left to care for the country, and it will collapse. Is that what she wants? Approaching the MC calmly, she says that the people are still there. Even if the corrupt nobles, the soldiers, the royal family, even if they are all wiped out, they were nothing more than mere details. As long as the people remain united, she will fight for the nation. That was her reason for living. Her aura grows even larger. The display of power from that woman was impressive, even to Inori. Finally, he could have a bit of fun, and with a sighing smile, the MC gives me hope that he might end this ribble. A wicked grin appears on his face once more. He was getting excited by the possibility of fighting his teacher. She grows curious about his reaction and comments that he seems satisfied with her answer. Inori hides his smile and apologizing, says that he underestimated and disrespected her. Standing up, he says that lying or bluffing wouldn't work against her, so he would answer her honestly. The magic binding the soldiers begins to fade, and they are set free. The soldiers, now turned into ghouls, begin to scream, ready to attack Ajiana. He explains that those soldiers were failed experiments and were no longer alive. There was no way to save them. Smiling with his usual wicked grin, he says he had already eliminated all her comrades, and now they were against her. To them, she was nothing more than food, and they begin to rush toward her. She doesn't react immediately, and from that alone, we can tell they won't even serve as bait. With red eyes and visible sorrow on her face, she says the protagonist's name. In her eyes, he was already beyond redemption. That seems to send a chill down the protagonist's spine. He looks afraid in this panel. With a small motion, her sword begins to glow red. An almost blinding light takes over the area where Ajiana stood. Some of the ghouls were already around her, and she declares that the MC is her true enemy. Surprised, Inori leaps back, knowing that if he were hit by that strike, he'd be in serious trouble. With just one swing of her sword, she strikes all the ghouls around her, slicing them in half, horizontally. Startled, he thinks that this one was far more dangerous than he imagined. That attack was her trump card. In her hand, she held an ancient artifact, a sword from a very old era. All the ghouls present had been wiped out effortlessly. He begins to summon countless knives from his shadow dimension. Inori knew his servants had no chance against her, and then her gaze returns to him once again. Even though he was afraid, he felt thrilled to see that look. It was exactly what he was searching for. Screaming in ecstasy, Inori says he'll use everything he has against her right now, and so both the knives and the wolves are directed at her. He truly was her real enemy, and thus, the chapter ends.
Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.